Welcome to TechStrong TV. Today's Thursday, November 19th. Cruising into the weekend here, getting ready for Thanksgiving week. Regardless of whatever you're doing for Thanksgiving, or either you're celebrating Thanksgiving or not, please be careful. Wear a mask, social distance, you know the drill. Too many people getting sick, too many people dying. The cavalry's on the way, though. We got great news on that Pfizer vaccine today. It looks like they've completed testing with a 95% efficiency or efficacy rating. So let's hope we can get that out as soon as possible. In the meantime, let me tell you what we have for you on store today in TechStrong TV. It's a good show. I have Anthony Edwards of Eggplant Software, who's going to come in and talk to me a little bit about automated testing, AI, and how it's relating to automated testing. And he had some interesting facts and arguments that I think maybe we're not making as much progress as we think we have. It's a good conversation. Catch that one. After Anthony, I'm meeting with Mark Hemmeling of Grammatech. We're going to talk about static code analysis, software composition analysis, and what's the state of things over there as it relates, of course, to DevOps and CI/CD and so forth. Then I have a great conversation with Jim Sorelli and McLean Bugle of NetApp. Jim is with Rancher Labs. They've just reached a new OEM agreement where NetApp is going to be selling Rancher as part of their hybrid cloud offering, and it's a powerful offering. It's a continuation of a strategic partnership between them. I think you'll enjoy it. Then after that, we're going to go back to something old. And we have the one and only John Willis talking about qualitative analysis for digital transformation, my friend John. And I think it's always a pleasure to watch John present. And then after that, we're going to turn things over to Charlene O'Hanlon, our managing editor, chief content officer. Charlene has the news. She has a little webinar preview for you for this week and next, as well as a great interview with the global security strategist at ForcePoint. And I think you're going to enjoy that. And then after Charlene, I'll be back to introduce Mitch over in the Analyst Corner, where Mitch is going to talk to Stu Forster and Steve Howard of Perforce. Some important goals of creating security software from the beginning of the development process. Perforce is a company that, started out in the repo space and has done several acquisitions, and they really have quite a lineup. So Mitchell has that. And then we have a double dose of Mike Vizard today in the channel roundup. Mike has Teleport CEO Ev Kovenetsky, and then Liz Rice from the Technical Oversight Committee for the Kubernetes. Liz, of course, is also with Aqua. So I think I'll be back to end things up. It's a great show. I'm going to take a break and be right back. Eggplant Software has been a company that's really, using open source and everything else, really been a pioneer in automated testing. I had a chance to catch up with Anthony Edwards from Eggplant. We talk about AI and its role in automated testing, and really kind of what's the state of the art there. Good conversation. Here's Anthony Edwards from Eggplant Software.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us here on another segment of TechStrong TV. For this segment, my guest is Anthony Edwards. Anthony is with Eggplant Software. Hey Anthony, how are you?
Hey, I'm doing really well, thanks. How about you?
Good. We're going to talk about AI testing and automation and so forth. But before we do, Anthony, we haven't had, well, we're doing TechStrong TV since March. I don't remember having anyone from Eggplant on TechStrong. We've covered Eggplant, at DevOps.com and stuff, but I don't think we've had anyone on video. So if you don't mind, I'm going to ask you to take a few moments and give us a little Eggplant software background, as well as maybe a little of your own personal background.
Okay, great. So look, Eggplant is one of the leaders in software test automation. And what we're really all about, what's interesting is that we're about transforming testing to stop being about compliance testing. Does the software comply with the spec? Does it check a box? Because in the end, no one really cares, right? What people want to know is, how do I produce software that makes my users happy and that drives business outcomes? No one wakes up in the morning and says, hey, we need more software. It's complex, it's expensive. You're trying to achieve something, but test teams don't do that. So Eggplant's all about, how do we focus in on actually helping people make better software that drives better outcomes and does that at the speed of DevOps, because that's real hard. So we've got a new innovative approach, uses lots of different modern technologies like AI, as you said before, to make that happen. So that's kind of what we do. In terms of the company, we've been around for a little over 10 years. We've grown up from being a small company to now over 600 enterprise customers. And actually earlier this year, we were acquired by Keysight Technologies to take us to that next level. We're recognized by Gartner and Forrester as one of the leaders in our space. But we think, there's a lot more to do. For me, since you asked, I'm a product guy by background. I've started off working for IBM Research up in New York, moved around a lot, but always focused on product, always focused on how can software transform industries. I worked in smartphones back in like 2001, when everyone was just trying to see what's the smallest phone you could make. I then went and worked in sort of gaming as it scaled up, logistics, and then moved into testing, because I think the big thing I saw was that software can change the world, but only if we can get it out there, and only if it works, and only if consumers are willing to accept it.
Fair enough. Anthony, I just wanted to make sure, Eggplant was acquired in June, you said?
Yeah, so we were acquired in June by a company called Keysight Technologies. They're actually a spin out of the old HP. So they really do testing at the hardware level. And when we were looking around for, we had a few people trying to buy us, and we thought, this is a great home for Eggplant, because what we see is that, as we all know, software is coming deeper into our lives, but all the cool stuff in software is actually comes with some hardware, right? I mean, I talked about cell phones before. Look at them. Mapping comes because we got GPS and software. Payments comes because we got NFC and software. All the cool stuff in self-driving cars, right? It's all about software and hardware, but no one's helping you test those together. And so we thought, this is really cool. You've got Eggplant, leader in software test automation, Keysight, leader in hardware testing. Let's put that together. So as 5G networks come out, as new cars come out, as all sorts of medical equipment comes out, we can be helping people get those to market with high quality much faster.
Got it. Good. Okay. So thank you for that. Thank you for giving us your background. I wanted to turn our conversation to AI and testing, right? Which is something near and dear to you, of course. I think one of the lessons that the DevOps movement has taught us is, number one, no developer, no anyone wants to deploy crappy software.
Yeah.
Right? People have pride in craftsmanship, pride in their work. Testing for a lot of organizations is where kind of rubber meets the road around quality, right? Obviously, hence the name QA, right? But what's happened is as the pace of development has exponentially increased, the pace of software testing has had to exponentially increase as well. And that can't happen without automation, without some sort of, whether you want to call it AI or machine learning or something, that something's got to give, right? We need something that allows us to keep pace. So let's talk a little, how has the testing industry as a whole, and then we could jump into Eggplant specifically.
Yeah.
What steps have they taken to keep pace here?
Alan, you're so right. I mean, I love it. I mean, people are really proud of their DevOps pipelines, right? Everyone wants to show you their DevOps pipeline. And whenever I look at them, I always see the same thing. Someone presses a button and I love it. A build happens, gets packaged up, it gets sent from dev to staging, and then it stops. And you're like, what are we doing now? Oh, now testing happens.
Testing.
Okay. How long does that take? Yeah, about 2 weeks. Okay. So, and then, 2 weeks happen, someone presses the button, zip, 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 zip. So people are like optimizing seconds out of their DevOps pipeline, but in the middle, there's like this, elephant that no one wants to kind of acknowledge, which is, yeah, but our testing sucks. It takes us 2 weeks and we still don't really believe in it. And I mean, and so as people try and move towards DevOps, I mean, that's when that's a greenfield project. And then you think about all these legacy projects, you go to banks, you go to retailers, you've got this legacy, and they've got this huge regression debt. And the thing that's really stopping them ever achieving DevOps is this big testing hole in the middle. And as you say, that's one of the things we focus on. So, and another fact just to throw out there is that test automation rates around the world, I mean, everyone talks about it more than they used to, but test automation rates are not going up. The test automation rates have been pretty static for the last 10 years. They're about 25%, right? So people are struggling to get past that. Yeah. And I think it's because, we're building up and up and up. But at the same time, software is then getting retired pretty quickly. And it sort of balances out at about 25%. I've got surveys going back to like 2001, where people say, right now we're at 25% automated. Next year, we're going to be 60%. And it's the same graph, right? Every single year. So something has to change. There's a few different things there, but and one of the things we're doing is how do we automate more of the test creation and that key pain point, test maintenance, right? Everyone complains about the maintenance. And this is where AI can help a lot. And also model-based testing. People have to get out of this mindset that tests are like these scripts, these linear scripts that are all separate, and I have like thousands of them, because that's never going to scale. So what we do instead, right, is we create a model. We have a model of the application. We can auto-generate large parts of that using some of our AI intelligence, and then we can maintain that. And then when something changes in the application, we can automatically reflect that in the model because it's a high-level representation. So I think people just got a bit stuck in this kind of linear scripting world that was never going to scale. They didn't modularize the way they did in development. And so having this model-based testing combined with AI to auto-generate, auto-maintain, you're able to keep up, do in-sprint testing. Now, there's another problem, which is what tests should I run, right? I can generate billions of tests now, but what tests should I run? And that's again where the AI engine comes in and is able to optimize. So if you've got 5 minutes to do a check-in test, we'll make sure we run the exact right test to optimize your time.
Excellent. Love it. So, testing is obviously an area we've delved into here on TechStrong TV, as well as some of the other video series that we run, as well as obviously on DevOps.com itself. And one of the issues we find, that people cite to us is quite frankly a lack of testing professionals. Right? The same way we don't have enough developers, we don't have enough cybersecurity people, we don't really have enough testing professionals, which, on a personal note, Anthony, when I first started DevOps.com, one of the things was that the QA folks were screaming about DevOps making them obsolete. Well, that certainly hasn't happened, right?
No.
I mean,
testers are always thinking this. They're really nervous people. Whenever anything happens, oh my God, we're going to be obsolete. It's like,
we're going to be obsolete.
No,
I haven't seen any QA people on the bread line, right? Or, the unemployment line. So, but and quite the contrary, we don't have enough professional testers, right? We have a lot of people used to think that there was no such thing as a professional tester, that a
You
tester
bet.
was like a way station on the way to a developer. But it's not. There are people whose whole careers are testers and they're
Yeah.
professionals. The problem is, so the only way you can force multiply this is with automation, with things like AI, right?
Yeah, yeah. And I think,
Now
you
you're
know,
going to have to grow testers in a vat. You can't grow, we haven't quite come to that. So, uh, how do we continue to, how can we upscale that? How do we meet the need?
yeah,
Is
yeah.
AI
And I think,
potentially part of it?
I mean, a few things there. I think one key thing for me is I think we're looking in the wrong place for testers. What
Okay.
if you ask any kind of, really good engineering manager or VP or CTO or whatever, who are your best testers? And the ones they'll highlight are the ones with domain knowledge, the ones who know the product, who know the audience, who know the users, who know what they care about. It's all about product domain knowledge. And yet what we're doing to testers is we're requiring them to know more and more and more technical stuff, right? And the problem is we're making it these days that to be a tester, you've got to be this like development guru. You've got to be better than the average developer because the average developer just has to know the technologies for their component, right? But suddenly these testers need to know the end-to-end system. They need to know everything from an AS400 all the way to through your sort of Censure app. Meanwhile, they've got to know the users. They've got to know all the markets. I just think that's crazy. So I think there's a few things. One thing is we need to stop this kind of total testing, like kind of mind these testers as unicorns kind of thing. I think we've got to get rid of all that technical skills that they require. And I think we can. I think the problem is everyone's reinventing the testing wheel constantly. It's like the 1980s where every development team wrote their own compiler. And then we grew out of that, right? And then in the 90s, everyone used to write their own, I'm showing my age here. Everyone used to write their own build systems. And then, in the 2000s, everyone used to write their own web stack. And then we all grew out of that. Now everyone writes their own testing framework, writes their own testing tools. It's just a waste of time. So I think one thing is everyone just needs to stop reinventing the wheel. Testing teams need to stop trying to like be their own little tools factory. I think that's a waste of time. I think we need to take advantage of the technologies we have to stop all the technical skills. Maybe in a testing team of 10 people, you need 2 people who have those deep tech skills, but the rest of them just need to be domain experts. And I think it's by pulling this sort of stuff apart, having different people focused on different things, that we get to this world where we, A, just get better testing, and B, we don't have this big skills problem that we do today. So I think that's the really key. I think people need to look more externally than internally when they're thinking about testing.
Love it. Love it. What about the whole sort of outsourcing of testing?
I think again, the sort of stuff I just said, I think helps guide people towards good and bad outsourcing. So I think for me, the sort of heyday of testing outsourcing was probably 2004. It was a while ago, right? Everyone just went, brilliant, we can outsource all our testing, job done. And that failed. And, show me the person who says that didn't fail. But I don't think that was a people issue. I don't think it's like, oh, testing services are all bad or something like that. I think the problem was you lost that product knowledge. You had a
Yeah.
team of
Domain.
people. Yeah, you lost your domain. So I think what you need to do, I think outsourcing things like setting up, managing your test environments, getting some of your underlying core bits of your testing infrastructure working, great. But outsourcing that domain product knowledge, I think that's really hard. So I think maybe outsource the tech skills because they're generic. The domain skills, that's got to be in-house. That sits close to your product owners, your product managers. And who would outsource product management, right? Doesn't make sense.
No. I mean, I did a bunch of venture-backed startups. I remember back in 2004 and 2005, our biggest obstacle around testing was scalability, right? You had to do unit testing, you had to test on different browsers and interfaces and so forth. And back then, it was hard to emulate it all in software. And if you
Yeah.
could, it was still a little clunky. And so you had to go to people who had, either a lot of desks or a lot of hardware or a lot of both, right? To get, where today, so much I mean, all testing is done in software, it seems like, right? And so you can, the various kinds of tests. So you're right. I don't think we'll return to 2004, 2005. But I do think we need, you gave a 25% number for tests that are automated, right? And that you're saying that's been pretty static since like 10 years or something. What will it take to get that to 50%, 60%? Doable,
so I think
never doable.
It totally is. It totally is. Like, one of the ways I say this is people talk about automated testing, right? They say, oh, we're doing automated testing. They're kidding themselves, right? Because, and I can tell, and I can prove they're kidding themselves, because there's a $35 billion testing services industry. And that's just that one particular bit. What they need to do is they need to start using the full words for what they're really doing. And that starts giving you clues. What they're really doing is they've automated functional regression test execution, right? They're still setting up test environments. They're still writing test scripts. They're still editing test scripts. They're still designing the tests. They're still setting up test data. They still come in the morning and read a log report. That takes the average team like an hour and a half to read through a report that says you ran 200 tests, 6 failed, here are the logs. Computers are great at that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah.
So the problem is we got testing developers, we all do this, right? But we get super myopic. And I mean, I go to testing conferences and there'll be someone giving a talk that's like, it's about something like, oh, how do you detect page load times accurately when you're using CSS this way and you're sort of slaughtering a goat over the keyboard at midnight and there's a cactus growing outside. And you're like, really? Like, all your test environments don't work. Your test data is rubbish. You're still manually writing scripts. You think this is your biggest problem. So I think what it takes is we've got to realize that all we've really done is automate test execution. We've done that pretty well. That's a boring problem. I wish people had stopped talking about it and showing me their latest framework to do that again, right? What we need to do is start looking at how can we automate test case design? Great AI, by the way. How do we automate test environment management? How do we get something that looks at my test logs and tells me, you know what? You had 73 test failures. We think that was due to 4 root causes. So it's not 76 bugs, it's 4 bugs that caused 76 errors. And you know what? It's Android 5.2 when you've got the Bluetooth on, and we think it's probably to do with this. Over to the developers, bug fixed, moved on.
Love it. Anthony, we're about out of time. I apologize. For people who want to get more information about this from Eggplant and what you guys are doing around it, where can we send them?
Hey, come to eggplantsoftware.com. We can contact us through the website. Anyone wants to contact me, Anthony Edwards, via LinkedIn or via the website, I'm up there as well. Please do. We love talking about this stuff. We'd love to talk to you.
I'm sure. Anthony, I do want to have you back on, though, because we went down a tangent here a little bit and our time got used up quickly. But we'll come back and visit us again, and we'll continue the conversation.
Anytime, Alan.
All righty. Anthony Edwards, Eggplant Software, here on TechStrong TV. This is Alan Schimmel. We'll be right back with our next guest.
SecurityBoulevard.com is the leading resource for news, analysis, and education on challenges facing the cybersecurity industry. SecurityBoulevard.com covers all aspects of cybersecurity, including data security, DevSecOps, cloud security, application security, network security, security threats, and more. SecurityBoulevard.com has the largest selection of security content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.securityboulevard.com to learn more. SecurityBoulevard.com, home of Security Bloggers Network.
Software composition analysis has become a real interesting piece of the market. The folks at Grammatech have come into it. They had static code analysis, software composition analysis. I caught up with Mark Hermeling from Grammatech to talk about that, and here's my interview with him.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us here on another episode of TechStrong TV. Our guest for this episode is Mark Hermeling, and we're going to be talking about software composition analysis, something that I think most of our audience is somewhat familiar with. Hey Mark, welcome to TechStrong TV.
Thanks for having me, Alan. Lovely day today.
Yes, well, it's raining where I am, but it's still a lovely day. Mark, why don't we start with some basics? Why don't you give us your company, a little background on your company, and maybe a little background on yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. Glad to. So I work for Grammatech. Grammatech is a very exciting company that plays in the application security testing space. We have two main divisions. One division does contract research. We're like a cybersecurity think tank for the US government, where they have big problems, and we've got lots of smart people that solve these big problems. And then one of my challenges is that I can take those solutions to those problems and see if they apply to the commercial world, and roll them into commercial products, and then make the world a better place by finding bad bits of software faster before it can actually turn into a big problem. So the company's been in the market for a while. We've got two big products right now, Code Sonar, which is our product that does static application security testing, right? Static analysis on both source code, so C, C++, Java, that type of stuff, as well as binaries. We can take native binaries, so compiled applications, and do static application security testing on that. We've been doing that for a long time, and we've taken lots of the learnings from that tool, and we've rolled it into something new that's called Code Sentry, which does software composition analysis on those type of native binaries. So think of like industrial control systems, infusion pumps, automotive, but also desktop and server applications. So it's really, really exciting to be at Grammatech at this point in time. Myself, I've been in the software development industry for about 20 odd years, doing everything from defense to networking to automotive to industrial and medical, helping customers build better software faster, basically.
Sure, fantastic. And just before we go further, it's Grammatech, Grammatech.
That's it.
Yeah?
Yep.
Grammatech.com for anyone who might want to check it out.
Lots of more information there, data sheets, videos, lots of presentations and recorded webinars and stuff like that about our products and in general, the market that we live in nowadays.
Yep. So, Mark, our audience tends to be DevOps, cyber, cloud native, digital transformation. Static testing analysis, is something that I think they're pretty familiar with. We've interviewed and had many, many guests, both from vendors as well as practitioners, who taught, static test is sort of the bedrock of application testing in many ways, application security testing, right? Yeah. So that's not necessarily new, but nevertheless, it's as important now as it was when we first started doing it years ago. When we talk about software composition analysis, this is a rather new term. I think it was Forrester who might have first came out with the term SCA and all of that.
Possibly, yeah.
Yeah, we tend to think of it mostly around open source yes. Code, open source components. In this case, maybe open source binaries. Correct?
Yeah, exactly. So but I think it's important to kind of take it a little bit apart. So for example, if you have a product and you use a web server in your product, right, as one of the parts of the application, then this can be an open source web server. Maybe it's like Apache or Nginx or something like that. And in that case, you're really completely reusing that open source component. And it's really easy to detect that open source component, right? Because it comes typically from an RPM or one of the open source repositories. And you can scan for that with hashes and say, hey, gee, Nginx is included as part of your product. What we do is a little bit different. We say, so customers built their own products and they built those products based on libraries. So maybe the library is OpenSSL, right? Or maybe the library is Qt, or maybe the library is something other fundamental that they build upon. So they link this into their application and then they ship the application. So you have custom code sitting on top of open source code. What Code Sentry, our SCA application, can do is it can scan that binary and say, hey, you've included this open source component as part of your shipment. So it can kind of take a magnifying glass and look inside that binary and tell you exactly what the software bill of material for that binary is.
Got it. You know, and again, this is not a new fact that I know we've discussed with our audience several times. The fact of the matter is, today's average application is, 75% or more sort of reused components and modules, and the overwhelming majority of those are open source, right? Whether it be libraries or what have you. And so, there are some, especially people who are not as familiar with AppSec and stuff like that, they'll say, well, why do I need one static analysis tool that scans just for open source, SCA stuff, and one static analysis tool that scans for everything else, right? And it's a good question, fair question. How do you answer those people, Mark?
So I'm going to take a step back first and say, SCA is not just about reusing open source. You can also be reusing commercial components, right? If you look at some of the vulnerabilities out there, a couple of them that I often talk to is like Urgent 11 and Ripple 20. Those are problems that were found in industrial control systems based on commercial TCP/IP stacks. Basically, that's like the 50,000 foot type of description of them. It's important that you know what's in your application. So even if you have commercial components that you've reused, you really would like to track the component that you've reused and the version of that component. What's really critical is that you have a software bill of material for your software, for your applications. And from that software bill of material, which says component version, you can then do lookups such as, hey, there's a critical vulnerability here, or this is the software license that I don't like, and those type of things. So that's really important. I typically split application security testing in two components. One is end-day vulnerability scanning, right? That's software composition analysis. What have I reused, or what has my vendor reused? And then static application security testing, which is what new bugs have people written in the software that I'm compiling. So it's like 0-day versus end-day type of vulnerability detection. Mm-hmm. And you need a solid approach for both of these two problem categories, if you wish.
Agreed.
And you mentioned DevSecOps. Yeah, absolutely. DevSecOps, this is important, right? We actually see two different use cases for software composition analysis. And one is squarely in that DevSecOps area, right? Where I'm building source code either for my product that I'm shipped. Maybe I'm a medical vendor, right? And I create infusion pumps or pacemakers, or maybe an industrial control system. I ship product. Second case is maybe I'm an enterprise company and I'm building software for my own use. So you have this DevSecOps, either as I start taking libraries from my vendors, I scan them, or when I'm ready and I have a build, I want to do a final sanity check of, hey, what's really in my software? That's the DevSecOps angle. But there's a very big angle there as well as to COTS applications that I'm using. So if I'm a large enterprise and I'm deploying software, what's the provenance of that software? What's in it? That's also where you can use this type of software composition analysis specifically for binaries, right? Because in many of those cases, you don't have the source code. You only have the binary. And there's very little tools out there that can do that for you.
Absolutely. I think, and I'm assuming you're familiar with JFrog's Artifactory and artifacts, right? It really, it opened up the world's eyes to just the sheer number of artifacts that we deal with in today's software applications and everything, right?
Yeah, it's crazy.
Oh yeah, billions, not to be all Carl Sagan-ish, but it's billions and billions, right? When we think about binaries, it's probably maybe even more than artifacts, right? I mean, think about all of the different repositories, all the different binaries that are out there. Does anyone have a number on, kind of existing binaries that are in these repos all over?
I don't. So we typically look at the concept of an application, right? And even in an application, in many cases, like you said, there's many different binaries in it, be it separate little applications that run next to each other, or DLLs that are collaborating to provide an entire application. But in a modern software enterprise, it's tens of thousands. So worldwide, I don't have any,
it's got to be in the
metric
billions
to give you. It's got to be.
But
Yep.
So one of the things there that, the way the market has kind of evolved is that a lot of these repo providers have developed kind of their own test to test the binaries that are in their repo. And it's great, except it sets up all of these silos where if I get the binary from this repo, I need to run their test there, but I got that binary from this repo, so I got to run a different test over there, right? One of the things about what you're talking about with Grammatech, of course, is it's not repo specific. The testing
exactly.
that you're doing.
Yeah. So we talk to our customers in the security organizations, and they describe exactly what you give here, right? They have many different repos that they download from. They have stuff that they've cobbled together themselves with some Python scripts and some open source software, and they get some amount of results. But what you find very often especially with software composition analysis is, say, here's an application X. It depends on maybe OpenSSL. The question then comes, OpenSSL has vulnerabilities. We know that, right? But if I've used OpenSSL, have I used a component from OpenSSL that actually has that specific vulnerability? Okay, just saying OpenSSL is there is not going to be enough. You have to say, yes, OpenSSL has a vulnerability in the send packet function, and that send packet function is reused in your application. So you have to almost go one step beyond the software bill of materials and say, yes, it was used, but the vulnerable function was not used. So that level of granularity is really what customers need, because if without it, you simply have too many false positives that you all have to then investigate, right? Because that's the other problem when you do all this testing and when you do all this, you get all this data in. If there is a vulnerability, now you know about it, and now you have to take action on it. So reporting a vulnerability, the tool that reports it has to be detailed enough to really report that vulnerability as credible and actionable.
I agree. Fair enough. Now, you mentioned you guys do a lot of work with the government, but I want to make clear this static analysis tools you're rolling out are not government only. They're aimed at commercial audiences. Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of our customers, as I mentioned, are in automotive. There's a ton of software in a car, right? Anything from in-vehicle infotainment to engine control units to cluster to automated driving. Cars are incredibly complex nowadays. Industrial control systems, right? Critical infrastructure, power and water, medical, like you said, also DoD, of course, the Department of Defense. But software is everywhere. Where we play, where our customers are typically, is in the verticals where failure is expensive. So safety and security is important for our customers, and that's where our tools play really, really nicely.
Yep. So, Mark, one of the, I guess maybe it's a double-edged sword. One of the things about open source is people, it's free, or at least free is imbued where they don't pay money for it up.
Right.
How is Grammatech offered? How are these tests offered? Is there a free component? How is it offered?
It's a commercial license. Yeah, there's no free component. We work with our customers. We have, of course, evaluation versions that you can do and try in your own software for a limited amount of time. But in the end, this is not free software. There's a license cost associated with it. And in general, customers win that or make that money back, right, with their investment. The return on investment is typically in the order of months or quarters.
Absolutely. And is it a SaaS-based offering, or is it traditional sort of testing?
Yeah, it's actually both. We're on that intersect that some of our customers really like the SaaS offering, right? Because it's, from a management perspective, it's just so much easier. You upload the software that you want to test, and you get the results back. But some of our customers are in that space where they care really a lot about their intellectual property, especially like automotive and DoD is there. even some medical cases. So we also have on-prem offerings. So you can install this on your own data center. Nothing has to leave your premises. You can do it air-gapped and those type of things.
Yep, I've been there, done that myself.
Yeah.
Especially in the government space. I had helped found a company that was vulnerability management scanning, not specifically static. And it was with the Department of Interior, and they have like schools, especially for the Navajo Nation and stuff, where, I mean, their internet is line of sight, kind of,
yeah,
and so you had to have air gapped, you had to have, in the cloud situation wasn't going to work. It had to be on the premise there.
Yeah,
so
it's air gapped either from an access perspective or from a confidentiality perspective, right? The government is making tremendous steps towards DevSecOps and getting fixes out into the field and onto equipment as well as the warfighter much quicker. There was a really good story that was published a couple of weeks ago, I think, where they did a DevSecOps, a continuous integration, continuous deployment onto a flying airplane. Where you go, well, now that's so if you can do that end-to-end safety and security, that's the holy grail almost, right?
Yeah, no, that's a pretty neat trick. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Anyway, Mark, we're coming up on the end of time. I wanted to make sure there was anything that we didn't cover that we want to cover.
No, this is wonderful. Thank you for having me on. Application security testing, so static application security testing, software composition analysis. It's important. If you would like to have a chat on what you're doing now, if it's sufficient, or if you would like to improve it, give us a shout, grammatech.com, and we'll get some of the smart people on the line and see how we can help you out.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us and telling us about it. Hey, Mark Hermeling.
Thanks, Alan.
Grammatech here with us on TechStrong TV. Thank you, Mark. We'll see you soon. This is Alan Schimmel for TechStrong TV. We're going to be right back with another guest.
ContainerJournal.com is the leading online destination for centralized computing-related content. ContainerJournal.com covers all aspects of software containers, from container management, data management for containers, container security, networking for containers, to the entire container ecosystem, Kubernetes, microservices, serverless, and more. ContainerJournal.com has the largest selection of container-related news, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.containerjournal.com to learn more. ContainerJournal.com is operated by MediaOps Inc., the team behind DevOps.com, Digital Anarchist, SecurityBoulevard.com, DevOps Connect, and DevOpsDozen.com.
So Rancher Labs, soon to be, I think they may already be, but soon to be part of, I've spaced on the name of the people who bought them now, the Linux distribution company. They'll come to me while we're talking here. But Jim Sorelli of Rancher Labs and McLean Bugle spoke with us about an announcement that both companies did recently. SUSE was the name of the company, by the way. You're going to get this all too one day. So it was SUSE bought Rancher Labs. But Rancher and NetApp announced an OEM where NetApp is OEMing Rancher Labs, Rancher OS, as part of their hybrid cloud offering. You don't think of NetApp, Kubernetes, but they have a great SaaS-based and hybrid cloud, and it sounds like a great partnership between the two companies. So here's Jim Sorelli and McLean Bugle.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us. Another segment here of TechStrong TV. For this segment, I've got two guests. Let me introduce you to them. First of all, they both have beards. I was going to say the guy in the beard, but how about we have Jim Sorelli, and Jim, why don't you introduce yourself first and go there?
Yeah. So Alan, you could have said I'm the guy with the gray beard.
Jim, we try to stay away from that stuff on my show. You know what I mean, Jim?
Yeah, I do. I appreciate that.
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah, Jim Sorali, Vice President, Global Channels and Alliances at Rancher.
Fantastic. And then joining Jim and I is McLean Bugle of NetApp. McLean, why don't you introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi, I'm McLean Bugle. I lead the product management group for NetApp, for the NetApp HCI product line.
Yep. And just in case our audience isn't familiar, what does HCI stand for?
Hyper-converged infrastructure, a full stack of infrastructure on-prem.
Excellent. Very cool. All right, Jim, I'm going to let you kick off. We got an announcement of some news that came out. And why don't you share with our audience?
Yeah, thanks, Alan. So first of all, thanks for having us. And yeah, the announcement for Rancher, you know, we've already had and have our channels program. So the traditional consulting practices, resellers, MSPs, system integrators, but we're formally launching an OEM program today. And we have NetApp with us here helping us do that. You know, it's key for us. Rancher's been around a long time. We've specifically made some products that are very specific for edge compute, you know, K3S and things with Rancher. People are familiar with that. But, you know, as we start to think about how our platform partners like NetApp, cloud providers, software vendors, different verticals, different types of devices, different business applications, really understanding their business model and putting together a program like we have. Our OEM program thinks through different contractual vehicles, pricing programs, support, engineering options to, you know, help our partners. And the key to that is, you know, and you'll see this as we talk with NetApp. NetApp is on the forward and, you know, innovative side of things, thinking through how they bundle Rancher with their platform to help their customers, you know, achieve, you know, better IT operations, manage complex environments, do so now in the world that we live in with remote, you know, people are remote trying to do more with less. So really, you know, what we're trying to launch today is we've thought through that, I guess, those types of hurdles that our OEM partners would have. We've come up with a program that will hopefully fit their business model. And you know, that's really where our core focus is going to be. And that's the launch of this OEM program.
Excellent. You know, before MediaOps, I was VP Corp Dev, Biz Dev at several tech companies I helped co-found. And OEM was something that I spent a lot of my time doing, especially at Still Secure. It's a unique animal doing OEM deals, right? You could have, as you mentioned, you have your regular channel, you know, you have service integrators and whatever your channel is, right? But providing an OEM service to another company, especially a company like NetApp, right? This is not a small company, it could be a challenge, but it's also, I mean, it's a terrific accomplishment. So congratulations on that, Jim, and looking forward to hearing even more about, you know, OEM efforts going forward. But McLean, I wanted to turn to you now, and you know, you're the shiny example here for us on this OEM program. Talk to us a little bit about, you know, why OEM was the right choice here, why Rancher was the right choice, and then what's NetApp, you know, looking to do with this as part of their hyper-converged infrastructure program?
Yeah, you bet. You know, I think it's really important to kind of maybe take a half step back and think about where we were coming at it from a market challenge or a business problem out there. And, you know, at a macro level, there are really, you know, your audience is very familiar with the pressures that the businesses are under to transform, and a lot of digital transformation efforts, and, you know, common frequent buzzwords around that. The reality is, from a NetApp customer base, we really see those challenges of transformation in kind of two buckets. There's pressures on the infrastructure team, your traditional IT. How are they, as Jim said, going to do more with less? So HCI, hyperconverged infrastructure, has really gained momentum in the market for the past 4 to 5 years. We entered 2.5 years ago with the NetApp HCI product. And this is really just about collapsing the experience of infrastructure management into the common management plane for the VMware administrator, specifically in this case. And so that's one half of the market challenge. But now IT's under what I see as the other half of the challenge here, which is now, how do you accelerate application development? How do you work with the DevOps teams? How there's a lot of grassroots efforts taking place in big, large enterprises, but IT needs to find a way to bring that all together into some centralized management that works well with their security practices, their provisioning policies, et cetera. And so that's kind of the evolution that the HCI industry, our market, product market is to now, it's done a nice job serving the virtualization space. How is it going to now simplify, standardize, and provide methods to IT services to support the DevOps teams within the business? And that's what led us to understanding the market, the different Kubernetes players, and what makes the partners out there unique. And really, from a Rancher NetApp perspective, it came down to really good philosophical alignment. NetApp is putting lots of energy, lots of development into an open approach with its ONTAP technology, with its data service management technology, multiple hyperscalers, embedding that into the hyperscalers, and of course the flagship products on premises are the landing vehicles of that technology, and so finding a way that is open, not locked in one cloud A to one infrastructure stack on-prem, and doing that is a very similar philosophy that we saw in Rancher with their multi-cloud approach, their kind of open source, open technology approach. It was a good philosophical alignment, Alan.
Absolutely. And I want to emphasize something here too, that I just had this. I'm trying to think. I was just yesterday. I spoke to someone. Someone used the term private cloud, and they were like, "Well, what does that really mean?" And yeah, I get the whole private cloud thing, and what the distractions and misconceptions about it. But I think we've got to make it really clear that even with Kubernetes, right? People think cloud native Kubernetes, so of course it's got to be up in the cloud. But right. The fact of the matter is, there is an awful lot of quote unquote cloud native infrastructure deployed on premises, right? And I would venture to say that when you get to, especially when you get to large enterprises, right? Global 2000 enterprises, I don't know if 50% of their infrastructure is in a public cloud. I think it's much less, right? I think it's probably closer to 30%. And so 70%, but let's be generous and say it's 50-50 for today's discussion. 50% of the global 2000 infrastructure is still on premises. And it's not all on mainframes, right? Some of it is, but it's not all on mainframes or what have you. And that 50% or more needs to be modernized as part of a digital transformation. You can't just say we're going to undergo a digital transformation and move everything to one of those 3 public clouds.
Doesn't happen.
Not
exclusively.
Right. Not in our career, path. I know you guys will be working much longer after I am. I'm only kidding, but but it's not going to be in the next 5-10 years. That's for sure. Right. And so when we look at solutions around Kubernetes, cloud native, this new stack, if you will, that, Rancher is so definitely, been a leader in, you have to think about what does it mean for on-prem deployments? What does it mean for hybrid cloud, multi-cloud deployments? And so in my mind, something like this partnership and this OEM just makes a hell of a lot of sense, right? It's
Alan, and that's, yeah, I mean, just to anecdotally here, you look at what NetApp's doing and their customers, not everybody's moving to cloud. So you need to have the ability to help them with that digital transformation, modernizing their compute, which is what you just brought up. And that's exactly right. And it's not one size fits all, right? Not on the platform, not on the way that people go to market, not the business model. So yes, this partnership is really kind of sets the framework, or at least what I think we'll see across all verticals and device types. And for many years to come, as you said, we're just scratching the surface.
Sure.
I'll add that, it's not, we're happy to assist the movement to public cloud. You think of us probably as many of your viewers might know NetApp as an on-prem storage system company, and we are. But we also have invested heavily in putting that technology natively into the hyperscalers as services, and so we see that transition. It's just not binary. It's not all or nothing, and so it takes time. It's gradual, and so by providing a common data management framework in each of the endpoints, with a standardization at the compute layer, you can now get application portability. You can get migration. You can get commonality of operational processes of how they're deployed and maintained and upgraded and scaled. So it's about simplification of that journey. It's not saying one's right or wrong. It's just an enablement, and we see a great opportunity for our technology and through this partnership to play a role in that.
Agreed. So as I mentioned at the top of the interview, I have a lot of experience doing OEM deals especially with large providers. Back in my time, I've done OEM deals with Novell, with HP, Extreme Networks, some others, Dell. There's more to just the Kumbaya announcement, of course, right? And a lot of people think of OEM and say, oh, they're just going to take the Rancher product and put NetApp branding on it. Yeah, I mean, at a very simple level, that's part of OEM maybe, right? It's called the NetApp service or what have you. But there's so much more. There's the integration into the existing NetApp stack. There's the integration between people, right? NetApp has to, I assume, do at least level 1 support, if not 2, right, on this. So they've got to be up to snuff on when people call up. They don't NetApp telling their customers, well, this is really a Rancher OEM. Customers don't want to hear that. They want to know, I bought NetApp, I want you to fix it, right? Or I want you to, help me here. So even selling it, right? I did some where we had like an overlay sales team that helped. Can you talk a little bit about those kinds of specifics here?
Yeah, you bet. And in fact, I think we've spent many months. This was not a week process, a 1 week process, and it took many months in the making to bring these pieces together. We started on the technical development of it actually early on, and worked through the business logistics, and so it is the categories that you mentioned, Alan. So we have at the product level, we have integrated the Rancher technology into NetApp HCI, which means the customer gets an easy button to deploy, configure, lifecycle the Rancher service. In fact, we kept the Rancher branding as is because it was important to us with the credibility that Rancher has in this space to understand and to help the customer understand the complete solution. But from a business and transactional perspective and a support perspective, yes, we are routing that through NetApp. So it is and specifically what we're routing, because it's open source technology, is the ability to OEM and sell the support. So customers can use the technology free with the product. It's there. It's available in the product. But enterprise class support is what we're selling behind the product. And NetApp is the front line, is taking the calls, and is working with Rancher through the back end to provide a comprehensive support model to the customers that purchase the support on top of the integration.
Excellent stuff. Is it? I should have asked. It's available now.
It's announced now. Early customer access is available. Look for it to roll out in upgrades of the software and updates of the NetApp HCI software in January. So it's coming out and announced in KubeCon.
Very cool. And of course, virtual KubeCon this year, but so many announcements and good stuff coming. So that's encouraging. So I'm looking forward to doing an in-person KubeCon next year, God willing, and let's hope for the best. Jim, I wanted to bring up another aspect, though, and that is, I think our audience is aware. We God knows we covered it. Rancher was acquired. I think that's getting ready to close, if it hasn't closed, or shortly maybe is the outlook. What if any kind of influence did the impending SUSE deal have here?
Well, so it has not been closed yet, Alan. And yeah, we're all hoping that gets completed very soon. But this was a Rancher NetApp partnership from the get-go and the start. We've yet to talk about what the three-way combination looks like going forward, as we're still kind of in that, let's get the companies closed and then we'll talk about integration. So at this point in time, it's really just been Rancher NetApp. And when that time presents itself, I think we'll all sit down and see how we can best strategize and expand the relationship.
Cool. Hey, we're about out of time, guys. One last one for you, McLean. It's announced. It'll be available in January. Where can people go start digging in on information on this now?
We are starting to do the education through our channel partners. Our field is aware. The field trainings have already taken place. So your NetApp field rep, your NetApp channel partner, they're going to be the ones armed with the latest information.
Yeah. Okay, great. Hey, gentlemen, thanks for coming on and giving us a great preview here. Sounds like a great partnership and a great offering for the NetApp team. Looking forward to hearing more about it.
Thank you, Alan.
Thanks, Alan.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, McLean. Hey, this is Alan Schimmel for TechStrong TV. We're going to take a break, and we'll be right back with another guest. As I mentioned at the top of the show, for something old today, we're going back to DevOps Experience, which was early October. And this is my good friend, John Willis. And John presents on qualitative analysis for digital transformation. Here's John.
My name is John Willis, also known by Botchgaloop, and you can find me at jwillis@redhat.com these days. So this presentation is called Qualitative Data Analysis for Digital Transformation. So let's go ahead and begin. Before we get started, for some of you who know me, I joined Red Hat last October. In fact, it'll be a year here in a couple of weeks. The gentleman to the far left there is Andrew Clay Schaefer. Him and myself are probably one of sort of 2 or 3, probably 5 pioneers that was originally involved in the whole DevOps conversation. Andrew helped me start the first DevOps days in the U.S. To the right of him is Kevin Baer, and he is the co-author of the Phoenix Project. I've known Kevin for many years. That's me, the short guy. And that's Jay Bloom. He's been working with Kevin for years. Jay is our sort of resident PhD. He has a degree in design transition from Carnegie Mellon. So really well-rounded team. So we were brought into Red Hat to see, it was sort of think about like the first 10 years of DevOps. We've done a great job as a community. A lot of the 4 of us, including a lot of other people, were involved in a lot of the conversation of the last 10 years. So, but in 2020, how do we think about the next 10 years? Should we be thinking about doing a better job than we did in the first 10 years? And so I think a lot of what we think about is that. And so anyway, Andrew likes to say we wrote some books. Kevin, as I said, the Phoenix Project co-author. I've written probably over the years now, somewhere in the neighborhood of about 12 books. A lot of them nobody's ever heard of, IBM Red books. But the DevOps Handbook is probably the one I'm probably most known for, a collaboration with Gene, Patrick DeBar, and Jess Humble. I also did a labor of love project with Gene called Beyond the Phoenix Project. Andrew's written chapters in both the web operations, site reliability, and I had influence on the Unicorn Project. I wasn't an author, but I've sort of worked with Gene sort of as an advisor for many years around that. And then myself, as I've showed you some of the things, a couple of things that of note, I would say the handbook and Beyond the Phoenix Project, but I also worked on some really interesting reference papers over the years, and one that I've been real passionate about is DevOps Automated Governance. So if you look me up, you can find a fair amount of presentations I've been doing about DevSecOps, Automated Governance, Automated Cloud Governance. Plus, I've been doing this stuff for a really, really long time, 40 plus years, but I'm only sort of listing the last 10 years here. And I was worked for Canonical, actually pre-OpenStack, so the first private cloud, Canonical, and then I sold the company to Docker. I've done about 10 startups over the 40 years as well. Early in at Chef, sold the company to Dell, and then of course now I'm at Red Hat. And so one of the things, as I've, in our travels, in my travels, like what are the things that I've learned about sort of, let's just call it transformation, like how do we get people to change at scale? I would say it's relatively easy, and I double quote easy, to help somebody sort of DevOps, right? Like there's enough literature, enough books that if you're a reasonably intelligent person, you can go in and sort of change a couple of value streams and automate them. The question is, how do you get a company to scale? How do you get a company that's 100,000 people? And I've found that sort of that brick wall getting sort of like maybe less than 15 or 20% penetration of these sort of DevOpsy things, and getting to like 60 or 70% has to do with primarily these 3 things. And I'll talk about each one of them. What I call sort of premature frameworks, or an impersonal approach, and mental models. So this is something I've been saying over the last couple of years is you can't lean, agile, safe, or DevOps your way around a bad organizational culture or bad organizational behavior. And so, although, and I'm calling things like lean value stream mapping, a lot of tools that are very effective, as I'm just calling frameworks. But you're agile, you're all these things, right? The question is, these are incredibly good tools at the right time. One of the problems I find is if you go in sort of premature with these tools and you don't really find out what's really going on, what's the gap, and it leads me to the second thing is, a lot of times, the sort of quote unquote experts, DevOps experts, or the DevOps, or the digital transformation experts will come in and say, well, I'm smarter than you, do these 5 things and everything will be great, right? And the truth of the matter is, I've got this from Christina Maslach. She's like, I've gotten to know her. She's one of the leading burnout. So I've done some presentations and research on burnout. And I did an interview with her one time. And I just took this quote she did in the interview when we talk about burnout, but I think it applies here to the wrong approaches that we take, in fact, this impersonal, like, I know better than you, do these 5 things and let's see what happens. And she said, whenever we're talking about any kind of change or improvement, you are counting on a bunch of human beings to change and make this happen. If they haven't been part of figuring out how to do it, the change efforts will be dead on arrival. So you have to include the people that you're trying to change in the conversation. So this notion that some expert team will come in and basically, say, do this, do this, do this, and, and just tell everybody, hey, we're doing these things. Typically, it doesn't scale. And then the third important point, that, going back to sort of 3 things I think why organizations can't scale these sort of transformations, or, we'll go back to Peter Senge, right, the 5th discipline author, or some people might say that, sort of the father of systems thinking, about mental models, right? And so these mental models, he said, mental models are deeply held internal images of how the world works, images that limit us to familiar ways of thinking and acting. Very often we are not consciously aware of these mental models or the effects they have on our behavior. So, I'll use the example of sort of in criminology, right? Like you take 3 witnesses that saw a crime and, one will say the person had red hair and the other person said they had blonde hair. I've even done this where I've taken 3 people on the same service team, put them in 3 different rooms and had them map out the service that they manage. And you wouldn't be surprised that they were significantly different, right? So we have this thing about mental models of, how I think about the representation, the beliefs, the premises, even how we operate. What do we think the goal of the organization is? And so one of the reasons why I've sort of come into this idea of qualitative analysis is I think it is a reasonable scientific approach to unbundling these 3 things that usually, I think, get in the way of a transformation. So when we talk about qualitative, right, the first question that comes up is quantitative versus qualitative. And so there's been a lot of work in our industry, DevOps surveys by a number of organizations and companies, most notable the Dora and then Accelerate, which has been fabulous work. But just to put it in perspective, a quantitative approach, like say maybe a survey or a psychometric survey, starts with a generalized theory and uses correlation to draw specific conclusions. So it's deductive, right? It draws conclusions from general principles. It's mostly numerical, right? So a lot of stats, math, statistical analysis. It is impersonal, right? So the surveys are your best chance for asking questions to try to pull out. And again, people who are experienced in psychometric surveys are really good at getting quality statistics using statistical analysis based on the questions, right? But at the end of the day, they are impersonal. You are not able to have that sort of human-to-human conversation regarding the question. And they're close-ended. They're typically, not always, but Likert score, strongly disagree all the way to strongly agree. So, and the thing that, I think when you're sort of doing qualitative or quantitative analysis, you typically start with sort of industry doctrine. So one of the things that in a lot of the sort of DevOps surveys, the sort of quantitative approach has been these sort of 4 variables: lead time, deployment frequency, change failure rate, and time to restore. So the theory was going into, so I think it was 6 or 7 years now, some of these reports are run, is that depending on how you address some of your behaviors and some of your technology choices, that high-performing organizations will be 100 or 200 times better at lead time, deployment frequency, and time to restore, and sort of lower in change failure rate, right? So that's the theory. You collect a ton of data, and you try to sort of prove out that, and if you look at most of the reports, they do sort of identify high, medium, and low performance. And so here's an example. How often do you deploy code? More than 6 months, between 1 month, between 1 week, right? So you get the point, or on demand. And this, again, get a lot of information, but here's the question. What if it depends? What if I actually have, multiple value streams? where one is on demand, the other one's once a week, right? What if it's sort of like, there's that, again, that sort of like beautiful or terrible answer of it depends. How does somebody, it's sort of close-ended, right? Like you've got to pick one, right? And so, the idea of sort of quantitative approach with the pros is it's easier to administer. You get a lot more data than a qualitative approach. We'll talk about that in a second. It is definitely objective, and it's sort of at its core using scientific method, right? The cons, however, though, are it's impersonal. Like I said, you can't, you can't. So, and I'll show you an example here in a second. But you can't sort of ask somebody, "What do you think that means?" Or somebody can't ask in the question like the word risk. What is and I've done a lot of research and work with organizations where some people call risk governance or compliance, and it's a sort of mixed bag. Same thing, close-ended, right? And it is definitely theoretical, and like I'll show you in a few minutes, a qualitative approach tends to be empirical, and it's context sensitive, right? Again, going back to sort of what I don't know as the person designing the survey, how you're going to interpret the context of the question. So now a qualitative approach, which I've found, I've tried everything, right? So this is sort of where I've landed in 2020 on how I think, right or wrong, how I think an approach, has been working really well for me. And the qualitative approach, it moves away from the sort of theory driving the data to approach where the data drives the theory. So what you're trying to do is, I think, all of us, right, we have industry doctrine. We sort of know what, like, if you go in the door of a large financial bank or something, if you've been doing it long enough, basically what kind of problems they're going to have. And you generally have sort of patterns and practices of solutions. And what you try to do, or I try to do in a qualitative approach, is try to not make any prejudgment. It's hard, but try to just ground up the data. And we'll talk about that. So it's an abductive process, right? Inductive, abductive, right? Towards general principles from specific instances. There's a sort of a category, you're trying to create categories of information. So you're listening to multiple people tell you multiple things. Typically, as opposed to a survey, one of the approaches in qualitative is interview, right? Group interviews, individual interviews. It's interpersonal, right? So if I ask you a question and I see a weird look on your face, I can ask you, "Hey, did you know what I mean?" Or the person answering the question and say, "Hey, what do you mean by this?" And you can have, sort of a human-human interaction to drill down on the interpretation, which again is open-ended. Creates open-ended conversations. In fact, most times when I'm starting these, I just simply get a group together, and I'll say, what is your company not doing that it should be doing? And that just sort of explodes into incredible discussions about, sort of governance and automation and toil. And so, for example, I've been doing these presentations called the 7 Deadly Sins of DevOps and this is just 4 of them, or 4 variants of them, but for my approach, the industry doctrine is that most organizations have, low levels of visibility. They can't see a lot of the work in the pipelines. There's not well-documented dependency maps. So there's a lot of coupling. My service requires V3 services, and I don't really know, I can't control the flow of those services. So I'm constantly in this variant state. I think recently I had an organization say, one of our problems is we've got these dependencies, other sort of value stream or the service dependencies, and we don't know if they're going to return the work in 2 hours or 2 weeks. So imagine trying to create any type of flow when you have that kind of variance. And same thing, consistency, right? Inconsistent environments, non-application of automation. It amazes me, I try not to be judgmental, but it amazes me in 2020 to have, a top 25 bank that still hasn't bought in on infrastructure as code for building infrastructure, capacity, and then just a large. So these are sort of some of the ones that you clearly like. Okay, so that like remember I said for sort of a quantitative approach, you're going to take those 4 variables. In a qualitative approach, I'm going to basically say industry document is that there are these things. Let's find out if they're there. And so as an example of, just very simple, what is the audit process like in your organization? And, and then so a couple of things. One, I do get to interact, like if you want to sort of, question me about, like what audit, is it external auditors, internal auditors, right? Like, so again, I get to have an open dialogue about that. But more importantly, I get to aggregate the questions, right? So I start hearing person 1 says they're terrible, person 2 says they waste about 30 days, person 3 says we don't tell auditors things they don't already know, and so I'm able to sort of ground up do sort of human-to-human conversations, but also I'm getting multiple answers to the same question in context, right? And so either in one conversation, and so you also have these beautiful side effects where somebody asks a question and somebody say, well, Bob, that's not exactly true. Like, again, you can't get that kind of dialogue. And then Bob's like, well, you're right. But like you can't get that dialogue in a survey. So the pros of, a qualitative approach is it is empirical. It's evidence. It's verifiable. The verifiable evidence, right? Like I can sort of ask you and pinpoint or drill in. It's open-ended, and as you saw in that last example, it's generally combinatorial. Like I can have multiple people, correcting or adding value to the answer to the question. Certainly harder to administer. Like in a quantitative approach, I can if I get it right, I can interview thousands of people. The largest qualitative approach that I've done. Qualitative approach that I've done is like 350 people, right? And that was like I spent a month at a large bank, less data, and it is subjective, right? But in general, like even the sort of quantitative approach is subjective, right? Like in other words, you're sort of taking a theory to sort of blend the data into it. So you do have, in either case, you have this sort of approach of industry document. The other thing that I've come to find is there are some fabulous tools for qualitative data analysis, and I found this one too. So there's a whole category called computer-assisted qualitative data analysis. So typically, without sort of tools, you basically, I bring like 10 color-coded highlighters with me, and I just start taking paper notes and highlight. Now what I do is I do this. This is called Max QDA. There's a couple of ones. I happen to really like this one. And you literally take the artifacts that you gather, mostly sometimes recording, depending on if the company allows it, but always transcripts, and then sort of notes. And I like to have at least myself to catch highlight notes and a scribe, and then I have transcripts. So I'm actually using, sort of a 3-pronged approach. The actual transcript, a scribe, somebody who's just taking notes in detail, and then I'm taking sort of highlight notes of really important things. And then you can add all that into the approach. And so one of the approaches I've taken, just get a little sort of academic here, or academia, is what's called grounded theory. So it's this is an approach where, for example, I have this data, I have interviews, I have transcripts, I have notes, and then I go through this computer-assisted qualitative data analysis tool where I actually code things. I'll show you an example. And then I start applying a methodology to concepts, creating a model in categories, and then I ultimately, data drives a theory. So I try to validate there's somewhat of the scientific method here. And so the approach that I use as part of grounded theory is this: work my way through coding. Coding is just, there's different sort of schools of coding, but generally you're identifying things inside the artifacts, the notes or the or the transcripts, and then you're working that up, sort of grounding that up to concepts of similar codes, and these tools also have amazing ways to add sort of context field notes, general field notes, and then you roll those up into categories that is basically driving your basic theory, and then in the end you have some sort of theory, which is how do you approach. So sort of code, concept, here's an example. Like code might be I highlighted the answer to the question on audit. Like, audits take 30 days a year and they consume a lot of time. The concept roll up is, I've heard this a bunch of times, to combinatorial sort of answers. Audits are inefficient. The category is risk. The theory might be you should start thinking about applying automated governance, And so I told you earlier, I have this, my version of an industry doctrine, which is I call the 7 deadly sins of DevOps. I've got full presentations on this, but you can take a look at, any of my presentations. But you can see visible work, management system toil, misaligned the sentence. If you're at the Phoenix Project, right, knowledge, alignment, the Brents, organizational design, understanding complex systems, and, sort of all funnels down to security compliance theater. So typically, the engagements that I do, I wind up interviewing, depending, COVID time, they're all virtual. Pre-COVID, I used to do, go spend some time in an organization, have all-day meetings. That's where you get real value out of it. Spend a team one on, a development team on Monday, a development team on Tuesday, an infrastructure team on Wednesday. So you get to sort of, it's really good when you start, by the time you get to the infrastructure team, you can ask questions about hey, are there any issues with, getting resources from software engineers and developers? And, the infrastructure team, no, why do you ask? I'm like, well, I've kind of heard from the developers that, that you cut all their sort of memory and storage requests in half. Like, of course we do. They're idiots, but in COVID time, I have to take what I can get virtual. So, but, so maybe 10 meetings, or, like I said, the largest one I did was like 310 minutes. So the artifacts are like lots of transcripts, a lot of documents. And then, the analysis is that I go through then is I'm constantly sort of updating this Max QDA. I go back and listen if there's audio. I go back and sort of make sure I'm sort of coding and creating, sort of categories. So you see here, this is an example of one that I did where, I have the interview notes, I have recordings in this case, and then I have sort of participant notes. And then those are the artifacts here in the document system. And then you see on the left, there's a bunch of codes. And then I've got some categories that I'm building, like automate delivery outcomes. And then, the good tools allow you to do word mapping. Here's an example of sort of highlighting and coding things and then sort of, putting them with some type of name or, so I can say it's an impact or it's cost or it's toil. And then these tools also have really, really good tooling for, so one of the things you have to do, right? Like, so you get all this, like you've got, 20 documents, you have maybe a novel, like 100,000 sort of words of sort of information. And so what you try to do, the really good tools allow you to tease data in multiple ways. Like you saw earlier, the word map is a good way to start. Like, let me find out what the lexicon here is and see, they use this word quite a bit. And then I can, sort of also start thinking about, let me start seeing what the data looks like from sort of graphically, right? So here's an example of just sort of playing around with sort of, okay, risk, consistency, knowledge, alignment, how do all the codes line up? Let me see, what the data, again, the whole thing is you're sort of trying to force yourself not to make judgments or opinions and then using these really incredible tools to see if the data is telling you something, as opposed to you trying to make the data fit a certain way. And then this is interesting because a lot of times the notes and the transcripts, like transcripts, so, sort of even the best transcriptors are, can't capture all the words. So this is one where you can, I'll go in and do a quick check on comparing the transcript to the notes and see where the gaps are. And then, so a lot of times the real, the stuff that people really get excited about is how we're doing with, governance, risk, and compliance. And so, start creating some graphs that sort of drill in on, what's, InfoSec, what's business, risk. And then finally, then what you're able to do is sort of aggregate that report. So you actually do get, a little bit of quantitative here, in that, quite frankly, what I wind up doing is, and probably the true qualitative data analysis scientist would actually get furious at me at this point, but I start looking at like how often, so if I've gone through this ground up process to categorize, how often do I find instances in that category? And then I'm able to sort of look at like consistency just showed up way more than, say, capacity. Again, there's a subjective nature to it, but what you would hope is the analyst has a pretty broad spectrum of knowledge of the industry, and then they're able to create, pretty high percentage, subjective analysis, if you will. But here's a case where consistency, funding, and toil just seem to be top of mind of all the conversation in interviews. And so then, which this leads you to your sort of theory, your thematic observations, right? Like in a lot of cases, again, the sort of anti-patterns of DevOps turn out to be, relatively true everywhere, low trust, right? And so you have your centralized authorities, your cabs, all that stuff, right? So but you're hearing it from the people doing the work. Like, I don't understand why we have to do a manual handoff to go from stage to prod. Like, can't we? There are other companies doing this like us. Other banks like us can do this. Why can't we? All right. And so sort of really figuring out where that comes from. How do you arbitrate risk and policy? Lead time. Again, I think companies that haven't invested in full automation, why does it take 3 weeks in these modern organizations to get storage or, VM? I heard one recently, where it still takes 2 weeks to be able to use an Amazon instance, or too many active projects, right? Like that sort of, we've got all these active projects, and then somebody screams, we need something here, and then you pull a bunch of people off, and so you've got all these often projects. Clarity, people just sit there and tell me, like, they just wish they'd get more clarity from leadership on exactly what they want them to do, right? Like, instead of like sort of every couple of months, like we're changing the sort of game on them. They just feel like they're pawns being sort of, again, that's the beauty of like having these conversations with people, and they get to tell you like, we can't make sense of this stuff. We start the year off with this grand plan, 4 months in, we're sort of, okay, no, we're going to do this with no explanation. And then, funding, definitely is, there's this notion of agile budgeting, which very few companies have really sort of figured out. So this idea of sort of your sort of yearly budget, you get this much money, it has a sort of life cycle, and those that usually, so that's the problem is you can be like DevOps and agile all you want, but if you're still waterfall budgeting, like there's a definite mismatch. Also, I try to drive into economic impact, right? So I think this gets fun, right? Which is, let's look. One of the things you get to do, again, in a qualitative approach is you actually get to ask, like, impossible questions. Like, you say if you just spent the whole day with a team, or even like, like a lot of times when I'm doing this sort of group meetings, they're usually an hour and a half, 2 hours. They're much better when I'm on site and I got a whole day, but I find there are people that just have like really good input. So I'll ask if I can do a one-on-one with certain people that seem to be sort of just very knowledgeable, very transparent. And when I get those people on an interview, I'll ask questions like, so given everything we've talked about, what would you say the sort of aggregate amount of waste that goes on here, either through sort of service management or ITIL or sort of things that sort of don't make sense or really don't help in their mind? And you'll get answers like 30 or 40%, right? And again, they're very subjective, but you're asking sort of leaders in the organization to sort of come up with a number. And what's interesting, I always feel sort of gun shy of asking that question. They're going to cringe. I cringe when I ask it, and then more often than not, they answer right away. Right. Like, and that's an indication that it's pretty clear to them how much waste they're doing. I mean, they live it every day, so you look like at a $500 million, but it's just sort of, medium to medium small bank. Right. Again, when we're talking about large enterprise and, Global 1000, like this is relatively a smaller budget. There's 150 million wasted on general process. And then, I think you can easily aggregate in lost opportunity costs for low or no automation, right? Like, again, if you're sort of manually building infrastructure and not using sort of Ansible or Terraform or whatever. And then there's this whole discussion that I'd love to learn more about, like, what is your cost of what I would call negative risk? All right, that means you're doing things that you believe are making you safer from a risk category, for a risk or a control point, risk control, but you're really not, like, making anything safer. And so you are then stealing time, opportunity costs away from making yourself safer. Like, that has a scary cost, right? Especially if you're in a regulated business and you can be fined or suspended from areas of business. And so I play around sometimes, like, especially in a financial institution. I've done this a fair amount of times with some banks, and so I sort of round the numbers up and down. So so it's generally anonymized, but basically categorically around the size of banks. So no bank on this slide is a real bank. They're sort of within range of banks that I've done, right? So I sort of look for, like, what are the things that you would want to think about comparison from an economic benchmark, like what's your revenue, how many employees, asset holdings could be interesting, but number of apps. And then the question was, if you've gone through some transformation improvement, what was your waste before and what's your waste avenue? And then this sort of math, and then what you want to do is sort of apply generalized and specific theory. Basically sort of, we have some industry doctrine. We've gone through the qualitative approach, and now here's the things that are out there, but these are the ones that are going to match what I heard. So I would say that one of the things I like about this approach is when you report back to a CIO, it's like, I'm not telling you as company X that you need to do things. I'm telling you from what I heard from the people that work for you told me these are the things you need to do, right? So, usual suspects, site reliable engineering. I believe DevOps dojos are the right way to do things, right? Increase your, automation, like that's just, DevOps 101. I do believe in, as we sit here, in 2020, I think the sort of evidence is clear that not just because I work for a company that has a platform, OpenShift, which is an implementation of Kubernetes. I think, platform engineering, platforms are the way to go. Containerized cluster management. You'd be surprised how many banks understand that. I've had a sort of leader at a large bank tell me that in banks, chaos engineering is absolutely critical. Right. So if you're, if you don't understand how this makes you stronger, and then being able to understand your sort of skill set, right? We talk about I shape, T shape, E shape. If you heard those conversations, right? Like, what's the liquidity? Like, if you're sort of moving people around, if you're picking up new technology, or you acquire another company, or you get acquired. And then the DevSecOps, right? Like, what is your pipeline? What is your sort of DevSecOps referenceable architecture for security? Do you have really sort of security embedded in all stages of your delivery? From a IDE plugin that identifies malware libraries or sort of vulnerabilities, all the way through sort of your build, your scanning, your DAS, your SaaS, your software composition analysis. And again, I would point you, just Google me and automated governance, DevOps automated governance. I've done a ton of work here. We've got some reference architectures in the slide deck. And then more recently working on automated cloud governance is really interesting sort of offshoot of that. And then design leadership, which is, this is sort of all the, I think people hate the word soft skills, but, it's how do you think in your organization about sort of leadership, the cultural, the behavioral, and some of the things that we've been doing in GTO, our team here with Andrew, Kevin, myself, and Jabe, we have this idea of a 5 elements assessment where typically people talk about dev, right? Or prior to the DevOps conversation, there was sort of a monarchical dev focus. And then, DevOps sort of created a dev and ops conversation. But then, the question here in 2020, where are your architects? Are they in the conversation? Where's leadership? Where is product? And so we look at sort of all 5 elements: DevOps, product, architecture, and leadership, sort of like Chinese medicine. Like if you're out of balance on, that holistic system, then you're generally out of balance. We also sort of value stream mapping is like one of those framework conversations I talk about, which is an incredible tool that you must use. Like I said, I don't like to use it prematurely. I like to understand sort of the gaps in, like, do a qualitative approach, where your behaviors are, where are the things that you hear the most versus some others, and then look at value stream mapping or value chain mapping, which is wordly mapping you heard. 3 economies, we've got some good work on looking at sort of platform engineering as broken up in 3 economies. Again, more on that. You can Google. Again, anything you have questions, Botchka Loop, I can point you to really good literature. I am a huge fan of the Team Topologies book, which came out from IT Revolution. In fact, I've been using for a few years. I got an early copy of it like a few years ago. And so some of the stuff they talk about, team boundaries, cognitive load in team, norming and storming. It's just a great book that has really meaty research. So like they're telling you stuff and they point to the research. It's called team APIs, like how teams communicate, not technically, but social technically. And then safe to fail, psychological safety, all those kind of things. So basically, when I talked about you sort of roll up data from codes, right, and you sort of get to sort of categories. So you find that there are certain categories. I won't go through all these, but these are sort of instances of categories. So like remember earlier, like if I find that sort of there's more things in consistency than anything else, then that might be the sort of first place to look for solutions. Funding, different sort of financing, and then toil. Obviously, toil's usually everywhere, right? Like bottlenecks, whatnot, visibility, and then communication. Different sort of clarity, how the sort of risk get translated to the modernization efforts, right? Frozen middle, risk, capacity. And then just sort of winding down here, this is, sort of a longer presentation, but what I usually do, again, going back to sort of, you start with a notional industry doctrine, right? So like in general, if you're going to do the interviews, you have in the back of your head that I want to tease out these, and I, typically think about the 7 deadly sins of DevOps, right? These patterns that seem to be universal as my frame of reference of how I'm going to try to have, qualitative, interview conversations with groups and teams and individuals. And then you walk through the data to ground that up. It tells you what the categories are. And then, I have sort of industry, doctrine on terms of how do you solve problems for organizations that are trying to do transformation. And as you can notice, I like the number 7. Again, I use it really sort of more for it just makes presentations and keynotes more attractive. They're just patterns. Like it could have been 6, could have been 9, but I find that the areas where companies struggle is just taxonomy, right? Go back to that sort of open-end conversation and human. I can get a sense if different groups or individuals within an organization are using different words to describe the same thing. The sort of the criminology, red hair versus blonde hair, right? So I can sort of hone in on like maybe one of the first things or the easy things to get a hold on is let's create some common taxonomy. Let's make sure that sort of everybody here, like we know what the words we're going to use. In fact, one of the years ago, I remember Eric Rees, Lean Startup, had a conference and he was interviewing a fireside chat with Beth Comstock, who was the CMO of GE, and BE had bought into Lean Startup, in a big way, brought Eric Rees in. And then I remember seeing that, and about a month later, I was actually with one of my startups that I work with, we were actually helping them implement a private cloud infrastructure. And I remember like all the people that were at the edge, the element, the people who were doing the work, were using the same terminology. They were using, build, measure, learn, MVP, pivot, And I thought, well, what a beautiful thing for an organization. I forget how many employees GE had, but 100,000, 80, 90, 100,000 people. And imagine you get everybody using the same words and having the same context to those words. I talk about team topologies and models, roles and responsibility, really understanding how you want to transform to platform. It gets a little technical there, but for example, I think you had to be under a rock to not realize that sort of containers and Kubernetes or cluster management is sort of the right way to go. The Cloud Titans figured that out years ago. Outcome-based metrics. I'm a big fan of flow metrics. So if you haven't seen those, of course, automation. Really putting, in 1/7 of your emphasis on skills liquidity. Not just skills update, not just onboarding, but how are you? I've seen really good examples of sort of gamification. Where maybe a guild where you actually get, depending how often you presented the guild and what you do, and sort of the net promoter score of those things actually go into your bonuses, make up your bonuses. Again, you want to sort of achieve skills liquidity, but you have to sort of put things in motion that are sort of out of the box and a little different than sort of normal. And then again, the whole safe to fail model is, again, really sort of important to understand. I'm getting near the end here. This is a longer presentation where typically I go through each one of these 7. There's a ton. I'll make these slides available. There's a ton of really good reference papers, forum papers we call them, that I've been working with Gene Kim and the IT Revolution for many years. So each one of these areas, the 7. Here's the 5 elements. I talked about sort of a Chinese medicine of balancing product and development, architecture and operations and leadership. Again, some good papers from IT Revolution. I'm the flow metrics. I think Mick Kirsten, his project to product, but I would say it's even sort of product to service, and then sort of platform as interface. So what you're trying to do is sort of collapse in operations and infrastructure, sort of right to left, and SRE and then 3 economies, and then you're moving sort of product focus to model focus to get to sort of your sort of platform is that sort of thing in the middle, a clutch. And we call the 3 economies is sort of a scope economy in the middle of a differentiation and scale. And I know I'm doing a disservice to that conversation by going through it so quick. Here's what I was talking about, the sort of 3 economy model. Typically, we think about the world as a 2 economy model, right? And so this idea, sort of how can we sort of move things? Let's the developers just do developer things. Let's move all that stuff into the scope, and let sort of operations move the infrastructure scale things into the scope economy. And we think a lot about a platform as an interface, as opposed to a platform as a service, change management. And then here's I'll make this available. So some great papers, forum papers, ton of forums, like 60 or 70 forum papers out there. Domenico Diagranis, Making Work Visible, The 5 Thieves of Time, Mix Project to Product, metrics. I talk about flow metrics again. I think you have to have the common 4 that we talk about: lead, deploy, MTTR, or mean time to restore, change success. But I think you get, those I would say are latent. In other words, you don't really get to decouple them. But flow metrics actually includes sort of wait time, and you get to decouple, or change failure rate by team or work. And then here's some really good papers and books, automation. I talk about trusted software supply chain. This is an example. I know I'm going really fast. Here's the DevOps Automated Governance Reference Architecture Guide. Some of the papers, governance papers, skills liquidity, dojos, continuous learning, safe to fail, chaos engineering, like I said earlier, or there's this notion of continuous verification, sort of a variant in a chaos engineering. There's a chaos engineering book, and I just want to finish up. Anyway, that's basically it. Again, Jay Willis at redhat.com, Botchgaloop on Twitter. If there's something you find interesting here, feel free to reach out. I'd like to have deeper conversations about this, or if you have some comments, or you think that sort of I've gotten something wrong, or or there's things I'm sort of missing, I would love to have that conversation with you. Anyway, thank you so much.
All right, next up is our Chief Content Officer, Charlene O'Hanlon. Charlene has news around the MediaOps sites today, as well as a preview of the rest of this week and early next week's webinar schedule, as well as a good interview with the global security strategist at ForcePoint. I'm not even going to try the name because I'm pretty sure I'll really mangle it, but it's a great interview, and do check it out. Charlene, take it away.
Hey everybody, happy Thursday. This is Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm here with the Thursday edition of the news headlines. First up on DevOps.com, we have an article about self-healing networks, namely how to create one. Today, more than ever, organizations rely on their infrastructure to ensure business continuity, not just for their customers, but also for their employees. In this pandemic paradigm that we're living in, the network is critical to keep everything moving and working. So when downtime occurs, an organization can lose millions of dollars in revenue and productivity. Self-healing networks have long been a topic of discussion, but they've pretty much just been that and really nothing more. But advances in artificial intelligence are making it possible for networks to self-heal when things go awry. And better observability tools are enabling IT teams to find issues before they become major problems, potentially eliminating downtime before it occurs. Self-healing networks are one aspect of digital transformation, which we've covered extensively on DevOps.com. Please give this article a look. It's a good one. Speaking of digital transformation, one of the things that often stymies organizations in their quest to digitally transform is handling all the data that comes in from the various sources and finding the right information to create that actionable intelligence. We are living in an era in which data is the new oil, but like that bubbling crude, it's worthless without some way to refine it. We have an article that offers up 3 tips for organizations to tame the data tsunami and find the most valuable information. The trick is in knowing what you have and what you want to accomplish, and then regularly tracking progress and evaluating your outcomes. Only then can an organization get the most value from its data. In the news, Dynatrace has added to its observability capabilities through the latest iteration of its PurePath distributed tracing platform. PurePath 4 adds support for the open source Open Telemetry framework and the W3C trace context specification for distributed tracing. It also has added support for service meshes and serverless computing frameworks running on AWS, Microsoft Azure, and Google Cloud Platform. Distributed tracing is becoming more popular due in large part to the growing complexity of application environments, and their complexity is outpacing mere mortals' ability to analyze events to discover the root cause of an outage or a performance issue. A healthy dose of AI definitely helps, and Dynatrace is just one of a handful of providers using AI to increase observability. On Container Journal, we have oodles of news coming from the KubeCon Cloud Native Con North America 2020 conference that's happening this week. For one, Carbon Relay has announced it acquired a performance testing provider called StormForger. It sounds like a superhero name, and has renamed itself StormForge. So Carbon Relay has an AI ops platform for Kubernetes and added StormForger to extend its performance testing capabilities. That's to help the growing number of developers who are now taking over more applications end to end. Also from KubeCon Cloud Native Con, Portworx by Pure Storage has added support for the container storage interface to the latest version of its backup and recovery software for Kubernetes. That opens the playing field for organizations to use version 1.2 of its PX backup software to move data to any platform that supports CSI, including cloud services, to integrate with Kubernetes clusters. And Twilio announced It has updated its agentless data protection software to make it easier to back up and recover multiple Kubernetes clusters residing in cloud environments. Version 2.0 of Trilio Vault for Kubernetes can now protect Kubernetes clusters deployed both on-premises as well as in emerging hybrid cloud computing environments. Over on Security Boulevard, we have an article that argues against the use of SMS or text messaging in multi-factor authentication. It's an inherently insecure process. Authentication by cell phone requires that the device itself be secure and authenticated. And if it's lost or stolen or the victim of SIM swapping, the phone is as good as useless. Authentication in general is due for an overhaul, including the use of social security numbers. And there are a number of vendors that have devised alternative authentication measures, including Microsoft and Google. As identity and authority authentication become critical for applications, financial transactions, medical treatment, and a host of other purposes, especially during this pandemic, we do need a better and more secure method of authentication. And we also take a look at the very real and growing issue of data breaches in the healthcare sector. We've known for a while that healthcare is an attractive target for hackers. Lots of entry points, lots of juicy data, but during the pandemic, it has just gotten worse. And now, with news of 2 potential vaccines, healthcare facilities aren't the only ones being targeted. Medical IoT devices and pharmaceutical companies are also very much in hackers' crosshairs. It's a nasty problem to begin with, but increasingly, data breaches and ransomware incidents in healthcare are becoming life and death situations. Technologies such as automation and deterministic alerting can help IT teams be more proactive in determining and remediating threats on the network before they have the chance to do major harm. And as these threats grow in number and sophistication, healthcare organizations need to step up their security game to keep their data and their patients secure. Well, that's it for today's version of the headlines. Just a quick reminder that today is the Low Code Today Virtual Summit, featuring all manner of discussion around the use and impact of low code in today's IT environments. If you're considering low code to help take the pressure off your development team or just to keep the lights on in your organization, stop on over and check out the event. You can register on any of our sites or head on over to lowcodetoday, that's one word.com. This is Charlene O'Hanlon, and I will see you next week. Until then, have a great day and stay safe.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey, everybody. Welcome back to TechStrong TV. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm here now with Homayun Yaqub, who is a global security strategist at ForcePoint. Hi, Homayun. How are you? So great to see you. Thanks for joining me today.
Great to see you, Charlene.
I'm interested in having a conversation with you about ransomware, and I know it's something that a lot of organizations have actually, unfortunately, have had to kind of deal with a little bit more. Maybe it's more prevalent these days as more organizations have been dealing with a fully remote workforce and all the security implications that go along with that. I know that the prevalence of ransomware has risen dramatically since the beginning of the year, and obviously the pandemic has not helped things. But you guys are kind of advocating for, well, I won't say advocating, but the question has been posed whether organizations should actually pay ransomware or pay the ransom when they are hit with ransomware, despite guidelines that the Treasury Department recently put out saying that under no circumstances should organizations pay the ransom if they are hit with ransomware. So definitely a timely topic. So thanks for joining me today. I would really, really love to have a conversation with you. What do you guys think? What do you say? And how it's not an easy decision for organizations to make, I would imagine. So, do you guys have any, tips or tricks or things to consider for organizations when they are, hit with ransomware?
Yeah, it's it's a great question, and unfortunately, with probably a very complicated set of answers. I don't think there's just one that you can sort of draw into. I would leave the decision ultimately of whether to pay or not to pay to the affected organization. I think my boss would be happy that I don't make an opinion on
Right,
or offer an opinion on that just yet. Not to least include also our lawyers and everyone else. That may
Right,
be involved.
exactly.
You mentioned the recent guidance that's come out from the Department of Treasury and others. I think you're going to see an increase of that. What, to your point, what fundamentally changed with the pandemic, and I feel compelled to at least say the new normal, at least once in the conversation.
Exactly.
The pandemic has really, what it created was an unforeseen level of access, how proliferated this became. People were connecting through any number of devices. I was talking to a company the other day with their overseas contingent in Southeast Asia. They actually had to purchase other devices for their employees so that their family members, who often relied on the corporate laptop as their only means of communicating or channeling into the internet and connecting to the internet, now presented a much greater security risk because those exceptions were few and far in between. Now you had kids at home, et cetera, and so on and so forth. And so this attack surface has just fundamentally increased. There has been, I believe it's a twofold to threefold increase in the number of ransomware attacks. The attacks are getting more and more sophisticated. What it really has, I think, put a spotlight on is one, a much more exigent need to not just pay lip service to public and private cooperation and dialogue, but to actually develop a cohesive strategy to address this. I think this is more than information sharing. There are any number of organizations that are set up to support the public and private collaboration, particularly in sort of the cybersecurity space and IT space. But this really does foster the need for developing a coordinated strategy. As we've learned from some of the recent attacks, there can be a crippling effect, not just on the company, and that translates into dollars and cents, but also into the consumers. A company recently was in the news, Garmin, for example, GPS provider. I was talking to a friend of mine who happens to be a co-owner of a small local airport, and he said he had to shut down operations. And planes could literally just not get off the ground because he was reliant on that data. And so there are sort of I guess military terms, first, second, and third order effects of these various ransomware attacks. And without some type of coordinated strategy, I think it's going to present an ever increasing challenge.
Yeah, I agree, and I think it's difficult to your point, to put kind of a blanket, you should pay ransom or you should not pay ransom, because to your point, that the first, second, third, levels of impact, if you will. There are also implications regarding, the health and safety of individuals when these ransomware attacks hit. And you have to kind of take into account, if I do pay the ransom or if I don't pay the ransom, am I putting somebody's life in jeopardy? And then there are also a lot of legal implications to it as well. If I do pay, I'm going to run afoul of the law. And am I going to have the FBI knocking on my door saying that I've been aiding and abetting terrorism, which is one of the arguments, if you will, that the FBI and other government, the Treasury Department are saying that, ransomware it's been proven actually that ransomware is used to fund terrorist activity. So it's a very, very difficult decision for organizations to make. But, when you are trying to make the decision as a company, how much leeway do you think the government would actually give you if you're in a situation where, to what I said, if you don't pay the ransom, you actually are putting somebody's life in jeopardy. If it's a situation like that, I mean, do you think the government is gonna, kind of say, well, okay, just this once or something like that?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think it's going to come to a focal point here fairly soon. The ransomware has evolved. The attackers, the committers of these crimes have taken, sort of, there's an analogy, right? Spray and pray. We'll just sort of launch out any number of attacks and hope one of them sticks, one of them lands. But there's been an ever increasing level of sophistication, very targeted, very focused. For the longest time, there were sort of the preponderance of these were against organizations that were arguably a little less mature with respect to their security environment, a little less evolved, perhaps, than some of the larger organizations who've invested have the capacity to be able to invest. But the implications were no less insignificant for them. They, law enforcement agencies in particular, local law enforcement, municipalities and counties and towns were crippled by this. And to your point, there are active investigations, there are active cases that they just didn't have the access to. And the challenge too is that part of the sophistication on the part of the ransomware attackers has been to now also hold the threat of divulging data. So it's not so much just locking down data, it's also now stealing the data and adding sort of a second piece to this to say, hey, we're going to start releasing, as we learned through the recent case out in Las Vegas with their school district. All of these things, I think, are going to come to a head with the larger organizations. For those of us who sort of vividly remember the too big to fail reality that we lived in with some of these very large corporations, whose material loss would have been far more consequential to the rest of the economic apparatus than just the corporation itself, because of how many millions of customers that they have, so on and so forth.
Right.
I think if we start to see an increase in those types of examples, the government can certainly take the approach of having a hardline stance and be very redline and say, absolutely, we will not negotiate. We will not come to terms. We will not do anything. But then I think the impact will very quickly be felt. It took days in the Garmin case. It wasn't weeks or months, literally days, where there was a net impact on flight operations. Now, granted, in a pandemic, there's not many flights going on.
Right.
But you can see as an analogous example how that could just as easily be into any number of other areas as well. So.
Right. Well, it's not just that; it's also the loss of customer, customer trust, and the loss of reputation in the business. I mean, there are so many things that I think, that a ransomware attack would
absolutely
impact beyond just the operations. Do you think, could we actually consider like a ransomware attack an act of war, depending on, considering the targeted nature of some of these attacks? I mean, are we moving to a point where, I mean, we've been having kind of a conversation about, cyber warfare and certain meddling by, some political parties in other countries. Some are saying, well, those, that's an overt act against our country, and it's no longer a physical border conversation. It's anything that impacts our infrastructure. So as well. So is ransomware possibly an act of war? I mean, is that something that the government's going to have to step in and define for us?
I think it most certainly will. I have a good number I've spent a good portion of my career in the U.S. government and in the Department of Defense in particular, and recent conversations with them. This whole idea of being more offensive in developing a cybersecurity strategy, that offensive approach has been essentially left to the discretion of the government to handle. There are any number of very large, Fortune 100 to Fortune 500 CEOs who will tell you that in an effort to protect their companies, they also need to take a more offensive approach. the laws don't support that strategy right now for the potentially right reasons. We can kind of debate the merits of that, but I think to your point, the moment and the whole reason for why some of the guidance has come out from Treasury and others, the moment that they see a potentially state-sponsored nexus to some of these ransomware attacks, and these are not just criminal gangs or so on and so forth, but they have the heavy hand of sponsorship from a state, a nation state. I think there is going to be potentially a redefinition of terms. What, to your point, act of war is. I would have probably several years ago said, that's probably a bit extreme in terms of a way of characterizing it. I don't think it's extreme anymore at all. Absolutely not. This is just another manifestation of a type of warfare. And look, we live in the digital age. That's not even sort of revolutionary anymore, right?
Mm-hmm.
We live in an era where data is the new oil. Just look at the top leading companies in the world and what they have commoditized. It's not physical production. It's information. And so absolutely, the moment that transition turned into a digital economy defining the economy, mm-hmm. I think it now also redefines the whole notion of what warfare potentially could be.
So that then means that the government, I don't want to say should, but maybe I should pose it as a question. Should the government then be more involved in what goes on the cyber landscape and and how we can protect ourselves through technology, through tools, through access and connectivity? Is that something that you think the government should actually have a greater say in from a macro perspective?
Yeah, it's a delicate balance, right? If we perhaps go too far down the path of increased regulation, then sort of the very thing that we pride ourselves in a free market society starts to become challenged, right? But at the same time, is there potentially a need for a more cohesive strategy that goes beyond just sort of high level concepts that fundamentally no one disagrees with? They're just high level concepts of what we should be doing, and maybe perhaps one or two levels below a bit more of an operational strategy. You see some of the industries moving towards this. Financial services in particular have increased the level of cooperation with the government. They actually have various bodies where there's offices where financial services members and government, members are sitting together. You've seen this in law enforcement for years. 9/11 was sort of the catalyst for that. But I think in the digital age, there is a far greater need for this as well. Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Well, we are certainly living in interesting times, and I think we're going to see probably, unfortunately, a lot more happen in the ransomware space before we really have some, I don't want to say resolution, because I don't think we'll ever actually find a resolution, but maybe before we're all better prepared to deal with not just mitigating ransomware, but just eliminating it altogether. So fingers crossed that things will start to kind of level out a little bit, and we'll maybe see a decrease in the level of ransomware that's hitting us today. But right now, I think any help that anybody could offer with this one is definitely going to be much appreciated. But Ho Meng In, thank you so much for taking the time and having the conversation with me. I have a feeling we'll be talking again soon about this, as it's definitely an ongoing issue that organizations are dealing with. So let's circle back in a couple of months and see if anything's changed.
I look forward to it. Thanks, Charlie.
All right, great. Thanks again. All right, everybody, please stick around. We've got lots more TechStrong TV coming up, so stay tuned.
Disruption is occurring across every aspect of IT. Open source, cloud services, DevOps, and cloud-native software architectures are democratizing IT and radically transforming how business is done. The old ways of creating software and doing IT are being replaced with agile, flexible, faster, and cheaper methods, benefiting vendors and users alike. Accelerated Strategies Group is out to democratize access of industry expertise and knowledge. We use our expertise and experience to offer insightful, intelligent, useful information in a variety of formats relevant to the IT community, digital events, videos, reports, assessments, workshops, and implementation projects with tech vendors, IT organizations, and business leaders. We widely and openly share our work products, often for free. Analyst reports these days aren't worth more than a graph or chart that tells a story or illustrates a market trend. We work with developers, DevOps teams, cloud architects, security engineers, and transformation leaders most every day, creating and implementing transformational strategies and technologies. We're not just thinkers, we're also doers.
Hey everybody, happy Thursday. This is Charlene O'Hanlon. I'm here now with the latest edition of the webinars preview. Thanksgiving is quickly approaching here in the States, and we have a couple webinars that are coming up before the Thanksgiving break. And I also have one webinar for you for after the Thanksgiving break. So maybe hopefully we can get you guys thinking ahead a little bit about some of the webinars we have. But as I always say, we have lots of webinars coming up for everybody on the DevOps.com site, as well as Container Journal and Security Boulevard. So hopefully there are 1 or 2 or 3 or 4 webinars that will pique your interest, both upcoming and on demand. But here are 3 of the ones that are coming up the quickest so that you can mark your calendars and attend. The first one is our latest DevOps Unbound Roundtable event. It's happening Friday, November 20th at 11 a.m. Eastern on DevOps.com. This one is, the topic is the reality of testing in DevOps. It's sponsored, as always, by Tricentis. If you're not familiar with the DevOps Unbound series, each episode explores some aspect of DevOps and features some of the brightest stars in the industry. Tomorrow's episode includes Miriam Makshinoff, who is a senior QA engineer at Calendly, Abel Wang, principal cloud advocate and DevOps lead at Microsoft, an all-around cool guy, Adam Arkelian, director of engineering at Dell EMC, Clint Sprav, who is director of product marketing at Tricentis, Hillary Weaver-Robb, who is a senior software engineer at InTest at Quicken Loans, and Mitch Ashley, CEO of Accelerated Strategies Group, being moderated by Alan Schimmel, as always. This is sure to be a very spirited conversation and one totally worth checking out, so please do. The next one is happening Friday as well. It's called Akka Cluster and Red Hat OpenShift, a symbiotic relationship. It is happening at 1 p.m. Eastern on DevOps.com. Again, it's also on Friday, November 20th. This one is sponsored by Red Hat Marketplace, and it is the latest in a series of Red Hat Marketplace sponsored partner webinars. This webinar will focus on how Akka, Java Cluster, and OpenShift can work together to create an optimal symbiotic relationship for high-performing distributed environments. Akka Cluster allows for building distributed applications on the Akka platform and handles nodes leaving and joining or a running cluster, while OpenShift adds and removes nodes as needed to increase capacity or recover from failures. Good stuff. Plus, there's a demo. And you know how much I love those demos. So please tune in for that one as well. The third one, as I mentioned earlier, is actually happening after Thanksgiving on Tuesday, December 1st at 11 a.m. It is 11 a.m. Eastern. It is on DevOps.com. It's called Leveraging Value Streams and for Planning in Safe and Beyond. Again, sponsored by Platora. This webinar looks at how management superpowers safe environments. That's capital S, capital A, capital F, and lowercase e environments. And our safe implementations, I should say. And takeaways will include optimizing agile release trains, value streams, and teams with value stream management, aligning and measuring OKRs and KPIs real time with data from DevOps tool chains, and how value stream management helps organizations move from managing dependencies to actually breaking them. Platora always has very dynamic webinars, and so I encourage you to register for this one and attend. I know it's going to be a good one. All right, that's all I have for this edition of the webinars preview. Please check back next week for another fresh batch. Until then, please, everybody, have a great day. And as always, stay safe.
Hiring great DevOps and cyber talent is a huge challenge for technical teams. Cloud transformation is driving demand higher. You've tried doing it yourself. Job boards, LinkedIn, didn't work. Recruiters are an option, but who do you trust and not waste your time and money? RecruitOps is the new way to source engineering talent. From MediaOps, the people behind DevOps.com, Security Boulevard, Container Journal, and more. We sit right in the middle of the hottest positions in Dev, Sec, and Ops, and the brightest minds in the field. If you're looking for a great position or the talent to fill it, we can help you. Trust us, risk-free.
All right, next up, we're going to go to the Analyst Corner with Mitch Ashley. Mitchell, of course, the CEO, founder, Accelerated Strategies Group. And Mitchell today has Stuart Foster and Steve Howard of Perforce talking about the important goal of creating security software from the beginning of the development process. Perforce, as I said, is a company that's been around a long time, made numerous acquisitions. I think it's a good interview. Check it out.
This is Digital Anarchist.
I'm pleased to be joined by Stuart Foster, who's product manager with Perforce, and also Steve Howard, who is static code analysis evangelist, both with Perforce. Welcome, gentlemen.
Hey, Mitch, how are you doing?
Very good. How about if we let's start up with just a little bit of an overview of Perforce, and then Steve, why don't you do that, and also tell us a little bit about yourself, and then we'll toss it over to you, to Stuart, to give your introduction.
Great, yeah. Well, here at Perforce, really our role as we see it is to help developers write better code more efficiently and more quickly. So these days we tend to talk about DevOps and the whole idea of developer operations and how they put that code together, how it's constructed, how it's managed, how we control the processes around it as well. Of course, there's more and more regulation, it seems, these days in software development, and we're making that whole process from start to finish of writing code to delivering it, that whole cycle is hopefully being made easier, more comfortable for our developers that use the products. So that's really where Perforce sits. And we think of that as really enterprise DevOps and doing it at scale in large scale organizations. So my role really is specifically on the static analysis side, or static analysis security testing side, SAST tools, if you will. Trying to make sure that that piece of writing the code, actually developers writing the code itself, is done to the highest possible standard from both the security and the quality perspective, and also at the same time getting the maximum productivity from our development teams.
Yep. Wonderful. Stuart, introduce yourself.
Absolutely. I'm Stuart Foster. I'm the product manager for Perforce's static analysis products, both Clockwork and Helix QAC. So I work with Steve. He's kind of my partner in crime, amongst a number of other sales engineers and developers and everything. And we're just out to produce a really solid static application security testing tool.
Excellent. Well, that's one of the great things about talking with you both is, since you have products in market, you talk to a lot of customers, especially in an evangelist role too, Steve. It really helps us kind of get an idea of where the state of security is in applications, what people are doing today. The whole idea of shift left, I think, has evolved a great deal. I think when I first heard it was move left in the workflow, and then it became, we'll move when the security people get involved. And we've really taken it much farther than that to really thinking about how we start writing secure code. Maybe one of you could kind of give us an idea of where you think we are as a community on getting to that point of when the code's written, it's written securely.
Yeah. So, I mean, from my perspective, you kind of look historically, people using the term shift left, and from our perspective, that would have been, doing some sort of code analysis on a server, and then moving that left in terms of the software development lifecycle into the developers' IDEs. What you see nowadays is that historically, a lot of those responsibilities would have been siloed. You'd have a security team, a QA team, various other teams that in many ways, because of they were siloed and in different stages of the process, you'd run into kind of bottlenecks. What you're seeing a lot more with the concept of DevOps, DevSecOps, a lot of development teams themselves are becoming owners completely of the code that they write. And what I mean by owners is that they are writing unit tests, they're writing more functional tests. They are ensuring that it's part of their responsibility that the code is secure. So that's the shift left. But then you have to think how developers work. They're working in IDEs. They have their own CI/CD pipelines. They may be using cloud services, various containers that are all getting spun up and broken down. So it's not just, to me, shift left anymore. It's analysis anywhere. It's basically having something that can work anywhere in a workflow, right? And in this sense, the security teams still exist, the quality assurance teams still exist, but what it really is a culture of security and collaboration that are coming together, right? Steve, I think you may have a little bit of a perspective on this too.
Yeah, I'm interested in your from the field perspective too.
Yeah, no, it's well, exactly that. I think it's a really good point that now we're not just talking about moving to the desktops, we are talking shifting left throughout the whole cycle. I think that is a key point. And it is really an opportunity using tools like ours and static analysis security testing is about being able to enforce the requirements and the needs from that expert security team where there were bottlenecks previously, trying to put that into rules and regulations that we can then push down to the development tasks and processes that are to the left of that kind of final sign off. So yeah, that in that form, very much I'd say it's shift left, and it's about that optimized process now where we can be doing that checking all of the time. So it's making sure we're continuously compliant to those security requirements or quality requirements, as the case may be. Yeah.
It's interesting if, we talk about the workflow when we think about the whole tool chain and pipeline, but if you really break it down into much more granular pieces, developers aren't working on a linear piece of development, right? They're in multiple places, jumping back and forth, solving bugs, adding features, developing a new capability, whatever it might be. So the ability to concentrate on any one aspect of an application sometimes is not even possible, right? So you need an environment where you're aided in how you write and create secure code, as well as think about writing secure code. You agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the point. We're trying to make sure that all of those pieces that they're working on at different times, and our colleagues in the version control system team know this very well. But obviously, there are tens or hundreds of branches running in parallel, as you're sort of saying, and developers are jumping between fixing problems on a current release maybe, and then carrying back on with their feature work for the next release as well, and all the time to try and manage what security requirements each one of those had, or quality requirements as well, would be a real nightmare without sort of tooling and regulation around that whole process, which is a significant part of developer operations as a whole, the idea of automating a lot of that and building it into the system. So I think it's just enforcing that with making sure we're adding all of the extra pieces that we can also include in those processes.
And also, if you think about those developers too, they're experts in their fields, or experts on some of the functionality that they're developing, but they're not also necessarily experts as a security team might be, right? So part of the trick too is to offer kind of help, knowledge, learning via the tool set, so that the developers can keep the velocity up and develop to those standards more easily. And I think Steve mentioned a little bit of a buzzword that kind of we like to think about it. It's continuous compliance, right? It's having this throughout the process and enforcing it and continuously monitoring, remediating, fixing, and reporting that become important for these processes to run really cleanly.
It's interesting. There was kind of stepping back in time again. I think about the myth of developers don't care about writing secure code. Well, of course they do. They don't want to write insecure, vulnerable code. But I think there was a period where we thought training was, let's teach them about, how to avoid writing code with vulnerabilities in it. But when you talk about a continuous governance environment, you're kind of talking about a whole layer of things, right? It's from the person doing the work to the environment that it's being checked in and integrated and being tested into the workflow. And then really the data, the information about that's happening on a continuous ongoing basis. And that's really your data set for producing the compliance information, right? We don't have to go ask you or check your code. It's already been done. It's done every step of the way all the time. And here's the evidence of it. And here's what we learned from it. And here's where we're doing well. And here's maybe where we can improve. I think that's how I think of continuous compliance. Yes, it shows up in a report down the road, but it's continuous because we have all that data.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point from the efficiency as well. I mean, the security team or the development management that want to know when this product or project will ship, obviously need to know where they are relative to that compliance requirement. And if we can keep it compliant from day one, we don't ever have that risk of building up, technical debt at the end of the process that we then have to solve. And I think that's a really important evolution that we've seen of the last few years, that that we have that knowledge to hand immediately at our fingertips, as you say. So that's a really important piece. And the other point you made there about the developer education, I think, again, yes, you can teach developers, and I know myself, in the past I've learned the right way to do things, wrong way to do things, but it is nothing quite as good as actually showing you the examples of when things are potentially risky within the code you're writing, because you really understand at that point what you're writing and how this could then be a problem. And it is the classic on the job experience that you really want for perfect education almost.
I'd love to hear your kind of definition or how you describe static code analysis, SAS, to people about if you're embracing that. What does that mean to a development team, to a software project team?
I think from my perspective, it's the idea of having an automated code reviewer almost looking at the work you're doing in a fairly pleasant and passive way, not being critical in any way, shape, or form as well. So from a cultural point of view, I think the developers perhaps accept it more when it's from a machine rather than a colleague that perhaps is picking holes in their code they're writing, which is another good point about having a computer do that initial check. But yes, it's like having that guard at the end of the process. And we often joked historically about the value of the tools and saying, well, if you had two developers that were both going for the job that you're advertising for a new development role, and one of those developers is the cost of the license is more, but they never make a mistake in the code. They check in clean, compliant code with every commit. Whereas the other developer, they both have the same experience, they both write good code, but the other one could make mistakes and could check in, potentially secure, security vulnerabilities. Which one would you pick as a manager? It's quite an interesting way of looking at it. But of course, you would always want to have that assurance that essentially it's clean code from day one.
Yeah, and also, in terms of the perspective, Steve talked a little bit about, the developer perspective or the hiring perspective. From the business perspective, you have to think about, the costs of reputation, lives, revenue, anything of a product being in the field and discovering an issue. The cost to fix a bug exponentially gets more expensive as you go further down the software lifecycle, right? So it's cheapest to fix it then and there, right at the start. And you know, in terms of kind of pain points that the software is trying to fix is, providing that knowledge, providing that quick remediation as developers are working, ensuring the velocity stays up, ensuring that, the continuous compliance enforcement throughout the process means that there's not a heavy lifting of work later in the process because you weren't reaching compliance requirements. The ease of using the software however a developer wants to work. It's all about velocity, in terms of, the business having that oversight and understanding, what are our risks and how soon are we going to be able to ship this product? Because, we know with many products, the faster to market you get, you have that first mover advantage. And that's what's needed in this fast-paced software market.
Well, it's very tough to recover from, reputation damage and quality issues or perceived quality issues around your products too. One of the ways that I explained it to folks outside of being a developer or within the security world is it's kind of like taking your spell check of a document and adding in the grammar checking. So this is the higher order, more complex, specific things around grammar. In this case, it's around security and helping you as you're developing or creating code, right? Make sure that you do it the best way. Avoid introducing security issues. I know that's a gross oversimplification, so don't worry. I'm not saying Perforce is like a grammar checker, but that is sort of a non-technical way of describing what we're doing. I mean, we want it to be that natural as part of the process.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's very true. I think, we've seen the evolution of static analysis tools very much in the same way we've seen the evolution of things like the Microsoft Word, spell checker to grammar checker and so on. And it's kind of evolved to be more and more all of the time, and other systems similarly. But on top of that, there's also the opportunity then to, what we find quite interesting is to write your own checkers and rules that are specific to your application. So we can find in some cases where there have been security problems in a certain application for some special reason, not necessarily related to the constructs of the code as most of the coding standards check, but something that's specific to the project because of the way the project is designed or the code in that project interacts with outside external interfaces. And it has been interesting to work with customers. In some cases, I've worked with a very large telecoms customer on one occasion. They said, well, we have this translation module between sort of the application and the platform, and nothing should ever, go direct between the two unless they're going through this one piece in the middle. And it's the kind of the golden rule that we've taught all of the developers from day one. Nobody will ever break this rule. So, obviously it was slightly challenged by this and said, well, it'd be nice to check the rule. Let's put that enforcement in just to see if we can, use a custom rule to see if there are any cases. And of course, as you say, it should be clean. And obviously, a couple of hours later, once the analysis is run, it's a very big system. We found a couple of cases, only a couple, but there were a couple of cases where exactly what they said should never, ever, ever happen for the security of the entire system. It happened. And so we were able to then remediate those problems and keep that rule in for future development. Of course, it will always be enforced. So that was a really interesting case where there's also that, where you have something specific. It's not just generic grammar issues, if you will, or spelling issues, but something very specific to that document.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you could imagine some of these things coming out of, requirements or an internal coding standard or things that a development team might be following and be able to enforce these, especially when you start looking at legacy code, giant monoliths, that have been around for 5, 10, 15, 20 years, decades, and you don't have those original people who are developing, right? So, we sometimes think of our tool also as, the kind of like a quality assurance on a product or a code base that, it's legacy and all the new people have no idea how to use it, but you need to expand on it. You need to develop it because it's valuable IP. And how do you manage, developing new functionality and moving forward when, it could be as brittle as a glass house, right? So that's the other benefit you get out of being able to enforce and write your own standards, I'll call them, and rules. Yeah.
Another classic case there, Mitch, is and you'll probably be well aware of this as well from the field, is this system was never intended to be connected to the internet. This was
guaranteed it will be then.
Yeah, it was an embedded system that was entirely supposed to run in an embedded environment with no connection to an outside world at all. And all of a sudden, it or something around it that's connecting to it is now connected to the outside world, and there's open attack interfaces. And now we have to make sure that they're not going to compromise the original legacy code base.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's just sort of the rule of unintended uses always occur, right? The thing we don't want to happen is usually what happens. So, yeah, the demo becomes the production system. It's another great example. I'm really interested in your perspective on where you think we are. If I made an analogy to the network security world, the best time to be a network equipment or network security salesperson is the day of or the day after a compromise, and automatically you've got budget and we need to solve this problem. I mean, I think we're well past that in most cases, but where are we in the software world? Do you see this as it's just a natural thing? Okay, what's our SaaS strategy? How are we going to be doing security within the application? What tools should we use for that? Or is it something where you have to mature to a certain point or have experience some issues before you're really going to take it seriously? Where are our development? And I'm asking for a generalization, I know, but what's your sense of where people are today?
I'd say, in general, it seems as though most people don't take these kinds of things seriously until it bites them. I think, there's some kind of safety feelings of some types of products that you can use, where you find out about a security vulnerability or intrusion, and you're using a piece of software that basically just tells you that the barn doors have been opened and all your horses are gone, right? But that's too late in the process. I think we all need to understand that, right? So the point of dealing with it sooner and using tools like security application security testing tools like Clockwork or QIC is that you're trying to build the risk reduction, the known unknowns that you can at least deal with sooner, right? So that you find out later, in worst case the doors were open, but nothing happened. You still have your horses because the stables didn't open at the same time or whatever, right? Just to make a kind of analogy to it there.
Yeah, I think obviously we do a lot of work in the embedded space, and in that area, having seen it over the last 10, 15 years, I think there was a time where we were educating people a lot more about what it was, what it was that we could do with static analysis to actually find some of these problems. Whereas I think, and there's a lot more awareness now of the risks in the security field and obviously what static analysis can do to help. So most people are starting to think about it if they've not already got it built in. So I'd say it is becoming more of an expected insurance policy against those kind of things within the tool environments. And obviously the other kind of driving force there is the regulation. So we're starting to see standards themselves creeping into the market. Like the new ISO 21434 standard for automotive, for example, where they're actually going to require some level of looking at the security of the system and making sure that we've done some of those things correctly. And probably that will include, we expect it to include some level of static analysis and coding standards and so on and so forth. So that stuff is really becoming almost regulated into the process, just like functional safety regulation has been in that process from the beginning.
Yeah, you could imagine.
Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, just on that topic there about like cybersecurity for automotive. You think about, the cars are effectively rolling entertainment systems, right? So there's a lot of like new kind of vectors for attack, right? An insecure Bluetooth module inside a car and its infotainment system that is also connected to the bus controller that's driving all the data from every sensor around the car that's controlling your fly-by-wire driving and your fly-by-wire steering and all those things, right? It's it's very important, very important.
Usually you have, I believe, cars and trucks that have starters can start by Bluetooth as one of the mechanisms. So, you have potentially the same attack vector. You need to be able to isolate that. Now you're into the function of the engine versus the entertainment system. And there's a lot of work going into, I know, to the automotive systems. They're very complex. I mean, just as complex as many business applications, maybe even more so, because they're integrated from so many different suppliers. And they are, of course, largely built on embedded systems. It seems like embedded systems, though, are much more accepting of an update process, of keeping the software current and requiring some way of being able to update software in an embedded system, or maybe making it an automatic process so it's kind of touchless. Is that your experience as well?
Yeah, I think so. I think that is coming into many systems now. I mean, there are certain manufacturers driving that kind of process, with automotive, for example, as a prime case. And it is interesting because if you go back 10 years, that just was never even considered. Once you kind of flashed that system, it was staying as it was until you climbed up the mobile phone mast or whatever it was that the embedded system was doing, and flashed it again with the latest version. So yeah, it is, the over-the-air updates is creeping in. And that will lead us to a more continuous delivery type architecture with the delivery of the software as well. That we'll be able to go to that. So there's going to be an interesting time. And as part of that, I guess now the focus has moved slightly from the cost of fixing an issue out in the wild to just, we don't want to have the issue because of the potential impacts on having that issue even for a day. The idea that a car might be possible to take control of from an external source, for example.
Yeah, and I think you're seeing a lot more emphasis on the security around a lot of these embedded systems, because a lot of them are so, requirements driven, compliance driven. They have ISO requirements that are needed to be validated by external bodies to make sure that these things are safe to use, because a lot of our infrastructure is built on the backs of these things that they're in some ways leading the charge of seriousness for these reasons, right?
Mm-hmm. And it seems also that industries like, we're talking about the automotive industry, are putting together their own standards. I think in part of fear out of, we don't want government standards to dictate to us. We'd rather us solve the problem, industry solve it in a way that they're more accepting and flexible to them. But do you see more regulation coming at a kind of geographical country government level? Is that more of that happening? And you talked about ISO standards, of course, being more industry.
Yeah, I'd say so far.
Kind of like our privacy standards, where we're talking about software security standards.
Well, yes, there is that as well. Perhaps, the European level, for example, or something we see on this side. But mostly it's industry standards from what I can tell. That we're experiencing and seeing come downstream at the moment.
Mm-hmm.
I think it depends on the level of sensitivity of the data. So you do see requirements as they relate to finance in like PCI, DSS, and things like that. You see security in terms of running a blank here, but they typically come from when the data is so sensitive. The U.S. government has their STIGs, DISA STIG rules, so it tends to come down from the level of sensitivity. I wouldn't be surprised if we do start seeing more requirements, perhaps for public data, but right now we have things like the HIPAA compliance and things like that. So as they relate to very, very sensitive data.
Yeah, defense industry is also a good one to start to drive standards too, and I know they're doing a lot in security. Mm-hmm. So just to shift focus here, we have a few minutes left. We were talking earlier about where people are in their maturity level of adopting SAST and writing more secure software using those kinds of tools. If you were someone on leading a project, maybe an architect or lead developer or somewhere in the management chain that said, we're almost there. I just need to do a little bit more convincing, or I need something else to help my organization get there to see why we need to do this. And I'd like to do it before we have, a major incident. What's your best suggestion for kind of doing that? I don't know if it's internally selling or if it's demonstrating the value of it, or how do you see people successfully getting their organization to begin to support adopting it?
I think that's a tough question, and just because there's so many industries and so many different kind of topics of particular interest, it always helps to have experience of a kind of issue that's gone out into the
we don't want to be like
domain.
Those people. Right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that always helps drive things a little bit. You've got something to tangible to say we don't want to end up there. I think again the regulation piece is where I see a lot of that being driven. The industry bodies are actually saying as a whole the industry doesn't want to end up there. That's not somewhere we can afford to be. And so let's try and make sure we get this right from day one, and that trickles down to the individual projects and so on.
Well, speaking of dogs, okay, hold on.
Okay, yeah. So that's
okay,
really where we're.
Just start your answer again.
Yeah, so that's really where we're seeing it predominantly from the. First of all, we don't want a case where there is an incident, because if we can use that as a tangible case and say we don't want to be like those guys because that didn't end well for them. So that's obviously always a good driving force. But then it's regulation from the perspective of the industry bodies themselves getting together and saying we really can't afford for this kind of thing to happen, and we want to make sure that across the industry we start to follow a best practice that's going to do our very best to prevent that. I guess is a good way of describing it.
It seems this is also an area where security teams, CISOs, can be a real colleague asset for making the case to the rest of the organization. Because if you're a standalone software team, you have one set of justifications or definition for why you need that. Another is there are corporate, the CISO is trying to accomplish these goals, these things with the organization. And it's always easier to fit your objectives within a larger objective and get that supported, get funding, that kind of thing. So that's another suggestion I would throw out there too, that also helps folks. And plus it brings security and software teams closer together.
Yeah. I think we do have security evangelists that are like, as you just said, who are championing it, right? And when we talk to those people and we go over static analysis with them, and this is the security focus, right? It comes down to being able to help understand their size of team, what kind of current development practices they have, and what that means in how you can roll out the tools and not slow down that velocity, because that's always the goal. Don't slow down the velocity, but add more value. So that's what we try to help them with, help them understand, and also help. Sometimes Steve is sitting with these people, and we almost help them mature in their software development process to move from a couple guys who are just doing nightlies and they have no version control, they're not using quality gates, they have no type of automated pipelines, to setting them up so that they can scale their development groups, they can speed up their testing, their development processes, and that all comes out of engaging with vendors like us.
Great. Well, gentlemen, this is a lot of fun. I really enjoy talking security and creating secure applications, and something that I think everybody wants to improve at to different levels, degrees, and hopefully before those bad things happen. It's always better to do it before, but if you have to do it after, you do. Maybe sometimes that's what it takes. So it's been a great talking with you again. It's this Stuart Foster, who's a product manager with Perforce. Thank you, Stuart. And Steve Howard, static code analysis evangelist with Perforce as well. Take care, gentlemen.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks, Mitch.
DevOps.com is the #1 online destination for DevOps education and community building. DevOps.com covers all aspects of DevOps, including DevOps best practices and tools, DevOps culture, DevSecOps, business impact, continuous testing, continuous delivery, and more. DevOps.com has the largest collection of original DevOps content, featuring breaking news, blog posts, podcasts, and more. Visit www.devops.com to learn more. DevOps.com, where the world meets DevOps.
Next up, we have a double dose of Mike Vizard today from Channel Roundup. Mike's guests today are Teleport CEO Ev Konovetsky on access management, and then he's talking with our friend Liz Rice, head of the Technical Oversight Committee for Kubernetes from CNCF, as well as Aqua Security. Here's Mike.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey guys, thanks for the throw. We're here with Ev Konsovoy from Gravitational. Ev, welcome to the show.
Well, thanks for having me, Mike.
All right, you guys are launching a new teleport control plane. I'm not entirely sure what it does, so walk us through what it is you guys are launching, and then maybe give us some background on the history of the company.
Well, absolutely. We actually have 3 pieces of news to deliver today. First of all, we are rebranding. So the company is called Gravitational, but moving forward, we will be known as Teleport, simply because we naturally have already developed quite a following in the open source community. So everyone knows us as Teleport. So we're making it official. And in a few days, we are moving from gravitational.com to goteleport.com. And the second important piece of news is that we want to introduce a new class of products to the world, and we call it Universal Access Plane. So if you are doing business in the cloud, you should be using one. You should have Universal Access Plane. So what is it? A UAP basically gives your engineers instant access to any computing resource that they need to access to be productive. That includes things like servers, databases, Kubernetes clusters, internal applications such as dashboards. So all of these things that usually companies have in their production environments and all of these clouds, Universal Access Plane gives an engineer access to all of them with a single login. Because up until recently, everyone was using just combination of VPNs, multiple access points, SSH keys, shared secrets. There's basically a soup of credentials that every organization tries to manage. So Universal Access Plane solves that. And that is what Teleport is. Because we've always been struggling how to call it, and we decided to play bold and just come up with this Universal Access Plane concept. And the history of the company, it's actually quite interesting. So we all came out of Rackspace about 5 years ago. And as you can imagine, a sizable hosting company, cloud provider with 7 hosting regions all over the world, all partitioned in many different infrastructure form factors. So what we observed is that there's this trend of 2 things happening at the same time. On one hand, an average organization now has more and more and more production environments or computing environments. Companies start sometimes with a single Amazon account, and then they go to 2 and 3, and they go to one region, another region. They acquire another company that uses Azure. So now they have that. So number of computing environments keeps growing. And at the same time, inside of a single environment, the tech stack, what's deployed in there, it keeps getting taller. So you now have servers and then virtualization on top and then Kubernetes and databases. Everyone uses multiple databases now. So the problem of giving your engineers instant remote access to all of these things is now just absolutely unbearable, especially if you want to get FedRAMP compliance, especially if you want to have visibility into what's happening. So if you go and ask like VP engineering at an average tech company, what's happening with your production environments right now? Who has access to what? What are the live connections? What's going on? it's really challenging for them to answer this question. The top companies, the famous tech brands that you see out there, they probably built internal solutions like we did at Rackspace, but most companies are basically trying to stitch together legacy solutions from client server era. So it took us a while to figure out that universal access plane is the answer. So we tried to solve this environment mess by other means. But now I think we have the answer, and there is the popularity of Teleport is growing. It's actually exploding in popularity right now. So we're doubling down on this discovery, and universal access plane is our answer. The first step towards this future of computing that we call environment-free computing. It means that as an engineer, when you're pushing your code out there, you need to treat the entire planet Earth as a single computing environment. So you shouldn't think about this kind of division between different Amazon accounts, GCP, Azure. Universal access plane, if you pretend like the planet is a computer, universal access plane, which is Teleport, that's your remote access to that computer. That's our vision, and that's what we're launching in a week or so.
For people who don't know what Teleport is, and much of what you just described sounds a little like magic, explain how it works, what it does, and what are the fundamentals?
Absolutely. So Teleport it's a proxy. I assume that your audience is someone technical. So Teleport is a proxy that understands all common remote access protocols. Examples include SSH. That's like number one thing, because you need to have access to infrastructure. Additionally, Teleport understands things like HTTPS. So if you have internal dashboards that you're running, it understands that protocol as well. Kubernetes API, that's another one. So if you have Kubernetes clusters running in many places, Teleport understands that. And then when, as an engineer, when you need to access either a server somewhere in the world or a Kubernetes cluster, or maybe a database, Teleport, we are going to be launching database support as well. So you just always go to this proxy. And this proxy, it has a few interesting capabilities. First of all, it discovers where all of your resources are. You have this kind of global live dynamic view of all of your Kubernetes clusters, all of your databases, all of your servers. So you don't have to worry about which jump host you have to go through to access a specific environment. So Teleport gives you just access to all of it, assuming that you're allowed to have access, of course. So that's from a developer productivity and visibility. That's really the benefit, that your the entire planet Earth is your single giant environment. And then from a security perspective and from compliance perspective, you can just infer from that Teleport, because it sees all of your remote access connections of all of your engineers, and workforce is now distributed, of course. So there is a unified audit log. Everything engineers do is recorded. For example, you can actually watch, it's almost like a video of interactive sessions. So you can replay and pause. You see what people are actually doing with these computing resources your organization has. But also Teleport, because it's smart and it understands protocols, and also because it sees what happens on every machine, it can give you a structured log events in JSON format. So if I need, for example, you know how engineers sometimes download like a script and run it and they don't even know what that script does, but Teleport will see that. They will see, oh, these files were deleted or created on a file system somewhere, or this script downloaded something from the internet or uploaded something to the internet. So you have this complete visibility into what's happening on every Kubernetes cluster, on every database, on every machine, down to like file system level events. So, but the overarching benefit, it's that it's unified. It's across all of your environments, staging, production, all of your applications, and your entire engineering team.
How hard is it to set that up? Because historically, anytime anybody has talked to me about anything in this space, they always get worried about how noisy the environment gets. There's a lot of things coming through. So how do I kind of make some sense of who did what to whom when, and then how hard is it for me to actually put this together?
Oh, absolutely. Great answer, by the way, because complexity is something that we don't have in our DNA. Just internally, our organization is very much against complexity. This is what we recruit based on. Teleport is a single binary, by the way. It's literally just one file that you can download. It's open source. You can find it on our website, goteleport.com, or you can go to GitHub. And so yeah, it's easy to set it up. You could set it up as a Linux daemon. You could stick it into a Kubernetes cluster. And we have packages that assist you with that. But also, and this is another point I wanted to make today, that we're launching a cloud offering also this late November. What it means that you could skip even those steps and just click sign up button, talk to our sales team, and you'll get yourself an account that will basically tell you like, hey, copy paste this command on your machines. And all of your machines across all of your environments will become visible on this plane. And we will be managing it for you. So yeah, the cost of setting it up is basically zero. But if you are extremely concerned with not trusting us, for example, with hosting it, then you have to do it yourself. But again, it's a single binary. So I would usually say that if you have a competent cloud team that understands how to set up things like load balancers on AWS or other clouds, how to set up auto-scaling groups, that understands network ports and policy and network policies, then it's not a lot of work. You have to understand too that Teleport gives you access. We are not you should be using us in combination with CM tools, for example. So you can export all of these events that Teleport generates into whatever you want to use, Alert Logic, Splunk. There are newer products like GoPanther.com, for example. We don't try to do everything under the sun. We simply give everyone secure access that has flexible role-based access controls, that has the audit collection. So we are not in the space of analyzing that data. And frankly, if you ask me for my personal opinion, I don't believe it should be something that people do a lot. Because if you have properly configured access that's connected to your identity against the central identity repository, and credentials are auto expiring, so you shouldn't be that concerned to deal with historical events. There should be no noise, simply because only people with access have access. And that's what Teleport aims to do. So we're enforcing access rules that organizations want to enforce.
A lot of our thinking around access is tied to this old castle and moat kind of mentality. So is that giving way now as the perimeters seem to be dissolving in this age of working from home? There is no thing to defend at the edge of the network. So is that pushing us towards more of an identity-driven approach? The concept's been around for a while, but I feel like we really haven't gotten there very far. So where are we on this adventure?
Well, Teleport is not pushing you towards that. Teleport makes it a reality. That's the default mode of operation. So we openly saying that solutions like VPN are just obsolete. Don't use VPN. So what Teleport does, it allows you to have extremely high granularity of access, where all of your resources, things like hosts, Kubernetes clusters, databases, internal applications, it's just a collection of endpoints. And Teleport is a universal access plane, which is this universal proxy that's present in every part of the world that gives you access to those endpoints. You should not even care which network they're on. I'll give you an example. From a Teleport perspective, a Tesla truck is identical to AWS instance. So you can, for example, if Tesla wants to have SSH capability into a vehicle, there is nothing special they have to do. Teleport, from a Teleport's perspective, that's exact same thing as accessing an instance. So Teleport, in other words, doesn't pay any attention at all to things like LANs, firewalls, VPCs. Those things don't matter. We believe that access boundaries, environment boundaries, it's a strictly thing of the past. So I want to be very loud about it. No, we're not pushing you towards that future. We are that future. That's something that you could use today and just lock your VPCs completely. No need to open any ports. Just use Teleport and your engineers will get access to whatever they need to have access to be productive.
Who's driving this conversation inside IT organizations? Is it the security team, or is it the DevOps team, or who has the mojo to kind of go take this on at this level and kind of get people to say, hey, we're going to change the way we manage access?
Whoever's got the bigger brain. Usually the way it goes is sometimes you have an organization where a security team has an upper hand, and they're pushing their engineers to have stricter and stricter access control systems. And usually those are legacy solutions that just put a lot of red tape in front of engineers. No one really wants to go through many logins like flows throughout the day and constantly get bombarded with access denied. Some organizations make their engineers fill out paper forms to actually get access to production, believe it or not. Not going to name any names, but those are brands we all know. So that's what happens when you allow your security team to dictate what's happening. So the downside is terrible developer productivity and happiness. You're just not really enjoying working in such organizations. Then you have the other extreme where organizations where developers have an upper hand. So, and in this case, you have some kind of shared secret storage being deployed with a shared SSH key that everyone can just go and use. We believe that, by the way, that secrets management is just, it should be anti-pattern in this world. There should be no shared secrets. So, man, these organizations, you probably see them in the news all the time. Sometimes they actually get pretty big and famous and then end up somewhere in the Hacker News that their infrastructure got compromised. Why? Because it's the easiest attack vector. So if I want to hack into like some tech company, I shouldn't be attacking their AWS account. I should be just attacking a developer laptop. And from there, I could just have access to everything. I'll get an SSH key, or I'll get into Kubernetes cluster from there. So that's really two conversations we're having, because eventually in both types of organizations, the security team starts to realize, oh, we actually need to be using solutions that do not slow down our engineers. And also you running into organizations where developers, they become smart and realize, no, we have to take security and compliance seriously. And we believe that with Teleport, there are no trade-offs. You're not trading one for the other. You have you actually get better productivity as a developer because you have this kind of God's view of what's going on. And at the same time, from a security perspective, you have a single place where you can dial in your rules. Like the obvious one, like developers should never see production data. Think about what it would take to actually implement that. Well, developer can access a machine that runs a Postgres database in production. They could access that machine using SSH. If that machine runs a Kubernetes pod with Postgres inside, they can go through Kubernetes API. They can also access that Postgres directly because it also listens on the socket. It might be exposed. And also that Postgres might have a web app that actually gives like a web-based access to that database. You know, like all this databases have control planes now, control panels now. So in all of these things, you need to somehow enforce that developer must not touch production data. Those things, they don't know if they're production on staging. They don't know if they have any data, by the way. It could be just an empty instance with no data. They don't know if you're a developer, or maybe you're a marketing intern, or maybe you're a CEO or CTO of the company. So how do you even begin to enforce that rule? That's what universal access plane like Teleport gives you. Because Teleport knows if these are production or staging or whatnot. Teleport knows, Teleport can enforce these rules across all of these protocols, Kubernetes, SSH, web app, database. And Teleport knows your identity because it integrates with things like Okta or whatever it is you're using within your organization. So yeah, using Teleport, you can easily enforce this rule across all these different layers in the stack.
All right, well, I'm not sure who has the bigger brain in between the cybersecurity people and the DevOps teams. And I'm hearing all this conversation about DevSecOps and people trying to bring their workflows together. And I'm thinking sometimes that may be a rumble in an alley, and I'm thinking sometimes that might be a conversation among adults. What's your bet?
I do think there is generally this trend that as complexity of doing business in the cloud just goes up, it's no longer enough to have people whose job is just to, just stick like cables into servers, right? So, or set up firewalls, simply because all of these environments, hardware, software, middleware, everything in between, it's all your application at the end of the day. So the way you access it, the way you update your code, the way you secure it, the way you keep the audit log, it makes sense to say, product team, this is all on you, because you are effectively programming this giant cloud computer that we assembled using these cloud primitives. So if you try to separate these activities across multiple teams, you are asking for a trouble, in my opinion, simply because there is this application domain with some security considerations. Then there is your database security, then your infrastructure security that's also split into multiple layers. So if you allow multiple teams to use disjointed tools and policies across all of these different layers of what essentially is an application, I think you're asking for trouble. So this is why you're seeing this, like the first wave was system administration kind of went away, and we ended up with DevOps because developers said we need to control the infrastructure with code. And now you're seeing the same thing with security. It's all becoming basically a part of your application stack.
All right. Hey, I guess we're just going to have to put everybody in a room and lock the door until they see sense and come out with the right idea. But I want to thank you for being on the show.
Well, thanks for having me.
All right, guys, you heard it here first. VPNs, identity access, management, it's all coming together finally. All right, back to you guys in the studio.
This is Digital Anarchist.
Hey guys, thanks for the throw again. We're here with Liz Rice, who in addition to all the work she does for Aqua Security is the head of the Technical Oversight Committee for Kubernetes. Liz, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. Hi.
Hi. It's that time of year again. It's KubeCon. Where did all the time go? What, in your mind, is the most exciting thing about KubeCon this week that people should be paying attention to?
Oh, that's a great question. I am pretty excited to see how we, as a community, kind of continue to keep up the enthusiasm and the excitement in a virtual event. I think, we're all getting pretty used to these virtual events now, but nevertheless, we've got to bring our sort of best selves to these things, despite the fact we're sort of, we don't get the excitement of the travel. But there are so many people doing really interesting and creative things. So I was super impressed with the way the co-chairs, have trailed the event. I am looking forward to seeing how their keynotes go. I think it will be a really fun week.
Do you think that the pace of Kubernetes innovation is getting to be a bit of a challenge for folks? When I talk to some folks, they kind of want a little more time between cadence, and then there was other folks who were hardcore DevOps aficionados, and they want every update every 3 months. So what are you hearing from folks? Is there a split starting to emerge between what folks want, maybe a long-term release versus, say, the latest and greatest every 3 months?
So I think Kubernetes, just the Kubernetes project, it sort of is inevitably going to be a little bit more stable because of its maturity and its adoption. They've been extremely careful about, maintaining compatibility between versions. One interesting development that's happened, I think, over the last year or so has been not allowing features to stay indefinitely in alpha state or beta state, but saying, we have to see progress and see these things either move to GA or, if they're not working out, we need to understand why. I think that's really good for the long-term stability of the project. Of course, the thing is, it's not just Kubernetes. Kubernetes is widely used these days, but we've got loads of innovation happening, all sorts of other aspects of cloud native and in lots and lots of different projects, lots of sandbox projects that are brand new. So there's inevitably a ton of movement and change and excitement there. I guess as an end user, joining this community from scratch is probably a little bit, there's an awful lot going on. But the good news is there's a lot of people in the community who really want to try and make it accessible and welcoming to people for whom it's all brand new.
That kind of brings us to this almost yin and yang conversation that goes on around Kubernetes. On the one hand, we seem to be trying to make some progress to make it more accessible. On the other hand, we keep telling everybody it's a platform for building platforms. So ultimately, I'll interact with Kubernetes through some other abstraction. So how do you think that split is going to go forward?
Yeah, there's a lot of attention being paid to the developer experience and the operator experience. One project that I think is really interesting from this point of view is Backstage, which came from Spotify. And it's all about the experience of their development teams, who I'm going to use the word platform team. I'm not sure if that's quite the terminology they use, but they have a platform team that have built this Backstage environment to make things a little bit simpler, a little bit more cookie cutter for developer teams. And I think we'll see initiatives like that taking off. I think ultimately, developers don't want to be dealing with a lot of the abstractions of Kubernetes. So initiatives like that take the developer experience sort of up a level are going to be a good thing.
Do you think it will always be developers managing Kubernetes, or will there be the classic mere mortal IT administrator using some graphical tools also managing Kubernetes?
Yeah, for sure. So I'm seeing more and more of these interfaces, UIs, plugins to IDEs, all kinds of things making cloud native tools kind of more nicely presented, prettier, tons of tools related to observability that, you can graph anything that you want. Now, how do you get real insight out of that? And that will be another area of real innovation. But I think there is an interesting overlap today. We have a developer community who come to KubeCon, many of whom are the developers of these cloud native tools. And we have to remember that knowledge that they have is not the same knowledge as a developer for a business application who maybe hasn't had all that kind of in-depth knowledge of what's going on in Kubernetes. So I think sometimes we talk about developers and there is more than one developer community. There's the traditional, let's say, languages like Java. Those developers can leverage the power of Kubernetes without having to know everything about it. That should be the end goal.
I think I'm seeing a lot more stateful applications on the platform. We've been talking about this for several years now, but it looks like it's finally coming around. What's your sense of what's driving that versus all these stateless apps that we always thought we saw, but now it feels like maybe they're more enterprise class applications?
Yeah, that is a good question. I mean, storage has traditionally always been seen as quite a hard problem in the cloud native world, and we're seeing more and more solutions for storage and particular types of storage. And some of those solutions have, reached graduation stage. So there's clearly been a lot of field proof of those being used. So yeah, we are in a world where state can be stored, I think.
All right. And then the other thing that keeps coming up is security. And it feels like for a little while now, people have been beating up on Kubernetes a little bit. And I wonder if that's just because it kind of is the new kid on the block and everybody wants to test it. Or is there something going on with security that people should be thinking about more deeply than we're seeing right now?
So I think some of the historical, things that people have seen, a lot of it is in the past. Kubernetes in its infancy was not as secure as Kubernetes today. Lots of things have been improved. Still, there is still room for improvement. There's also a lot of optional things that people can choose to do, like maybe you want to run your containers using a sandbox like gvisor or Firecracker, or rather than just running in a regular kind of containerd runtime. These are options that are available to help people add additional security. And obviously tools, that companies like Aqua can provide that add, additional enterprise level views and scale across the application lifecycle, the container lifecycle, the infrastructure. I mean, we talk at Aqua quite a lot about securing your infrastructure, securing the build, and securing the workloads. And there are tools for all of those different pillars. You need to, as an enterprise, apply those tools. It doesn't just come out of the box today.
So what is the coolest new feature going into Kubernetes? It may not be in the current release, or it may be something that's coming down the pike that's got your attention. Where do what's making you stand up and take notice?
Oh, that's an interesting question. One thing that I think is not yet a completely solved problem, but that I'm very interested to see where we go with this is pod security policies and what comes next with regard to pod security policies. I mentioned earlier about this idea that we can't leave features in alpha and beta indefinitely, and pod security policies is one of those features. And is OPA going to give all of the solutions to that problem? Maybe not. But I'm very interested to see where the community kind of lands on security policy enforcement. It's a really important problem because of the way that without policy enforcement, it's too easy to run a container in an insecure way. So we definitely need some kind of policy enforcement. Seems like we're moving away from pod security policy in its current incarnation. Interested to see where we land.
All right, that's always going to get somebody's attention. One of the things I do see is more people are trying to deploy Kubernetes at scale. Do you have any advice for those folks? I mean, a couple of people go, yeah, I got a cluster up and running. That was great. But now they need to manage what could become fleets of clusters real soon. So what do you think is going to be the difference, or is there a different mindset that needs to be implemented as you kind of think about Kubernetes at the edge, in the data center, and in the cloud?
Yeah, this whole world of hybrid or multi-cloud, it's getting quite a lot of attention because people really want to, they do want to run Kubernetes workloads in a variety of locations. Some of it, I think, being to do with scale, some of it being to do with the physical distribution of workloads. We've seen a couple of projects joining the CNCF this year related to running Kubernetes in the edge, either entire clusters or distributing, various components around, sort of expecting that they might become detached and need to reconnect later. So there's a lot of interesting problems that are being worked on. I think scale. We've seen some big demonstrations in previous years of people running, 5,000 nodes or whatever. I think these kind of multi-cloud demonstrations we'll probably see more and more of. It will be interesting to see how much that's pushed, particularly by the cloud providers at this KubeCon.
Do you think that organizations would be better served to make sure they're using either a curated instance of Kubernetes or a managed service, or can they work with more of the raw bits? What do you think?
I think that if you don't know the answer to that question already, not you personally, obviously, but as a user, if you don't know whether you need a managed service or some of the bells and whistles that you could manipulate yourself, I would probably start with a managed service, because it's going to be much easier to get up and running. You'll get to understand what Kubernetes is going to offer you and maybe what things you want to do differently. And for a lot of end users, those managed solutions will be, we'll give them everything they need. Maybe it turns out there's something that they want to do differently, or they want to have a kind of hybrid approach and they need to learn how to manage their own deployments. Maybe there are features that they can't necessarily get from their cloud provider. That's the time to sort of focus energies. But if it was me, I would say it's a little bit like running a database, right? If you can run a managed, RDS type database service, that's by far easier than trying to install your own database. And I think we've seen, unless you have a good reason to run your own database, you use a managed one. I think we'll see the same for Kubernetes and other cloud native services.
One of the things that happens a lot is people are kind of interested in contributing to the community, but they really don't know where to start or how to get involved. Is there some advice that you have for newbies who are looking at this and saying, hey, I want to be part of this, but where do I start? How do I jump in?
Yeah, so I think one of the really lovely things about the CNCF is the amount of attention that gets paid to bringing people on board and welcoming people, which there's still always going to be a little bit of a leap, just come and get involved. But there are so many initiatives. There's, join the Slack channels that you're interested in. People will point you in the right direction. Don't be afraid to join a call if there's like a community call talking about a project and you think it sounds interesting. You will be welcome. People are pretty good amongst most projects at marking issues for that are good for new user, good first issues or help wanted. So there's quite a lot of signposting, trying to encourage projects to give more and more information about how to contribute. So the contributions are always welcome, and I think the projects will increasingly try, they're already trying very hard and increasingly offering the sort of pathways for people to get involved.
All right, everybody jump in. There's lots of work to be done. Liz, thanks for being on the show.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
And back to you guys in the studio.
CISO Talk, to hear how real-world CISOs are dealing with today's real-world issues. From enabling secure remote workers to accelerating secure cloud adoption, defending against a pandemic of security attacks and beyond, CISO Talk covers the cyber topics you want to learn about. With your hosts, Unisys CISO Matt Newfield and MediaOps CEO Alan Schimmel, featuring a revolving panel of CISO cyber experts, this is where CISOs talk. Join us on digitalanarchist.com and techstrong.tv.
All right. Great show today. Hey, that's going to wrap it for this week. Have a great weekend. Be careful out there. Stay safe. Stay well. Stay strong. Tech strong. We'll see you Monday with an all-new fresh show.